Section 101. Unfortunately for John, he was suddenly in the minority. The divination class held their teacups and watched their leaves, while John placed his badge on the table. With a gentle tap of his finger, two projection-like images rose above it. Professor Sybil Trelawney pretended not to notice a student slacking off, but Hermione watched, surprised and curious. She remembered what Professor McGonagall had given her the day before and wondered why John hadn't received anything. John's image pinged into two other classrooms as well. The professors were stunned. They had not expected such a display. If it weren't for John's studious nature, his uncanny ability to focus under pressure, he would never have managed it. When he switched into that mode, he didn't just absorb information. He could answer questions with ease. "In trouble?" Trelawney asked as she read his leaves. Through the tea leaves, John saw himself in difficulty, and he wondered what problems Hogwarts could possibly hold for him. After telling Professor Trelawney what he had seen, she rewarded him with extra house points. She looked on him with a new reverence. It was the first time she had witnessed such divination talent in anyone outside her family. In contrast, she was noticeably unkind to Hermione, grasping her hand and lamenting that Hermione's aura was pitifully small. Hermione wanted to punch something. Harry, meanwhile, had been shown the omen of a black dog, a detail that linked back to John's earlier prophecy and earned him nothing but pitying looks. Harry left the classroom, disappointed. Their second period was Transfiguration. Professor McGonagall, seeing their deflated faces, immediately reassured them that divination was imprecise. Trelawney produced several predictions of doom every year, and her words finally eased many students. Neville, however, spoke up hesitantly. But John prophesied too. "John?" McGonagall blinked. Neville recounted John's prophecy, and McGonagall grew pale. "Does John Wick have the sight? A seer? That's extraordinarily rare, perhaps one in the whole country." Her comment tightened the room again. McGonagall thought of Dumbledore's odd behavior. This semester, 2 students had opted for all electives, yet Dumbledore had only allowed one of them access to a certain item. Recalling what Dumbledore had said, she fell into thought. "Minerva, some overly curious students will touch taboos," Dumbledore had warned. In the headmaster's office, Dumbledore's eyes were deep as ever. The golden hourglass before him was an extremely precious magical object. Only a handful of such things remained, and those were kept in the Department of Mysteries. McGonagall could not understand why Dumbledore doubted John Wick's ability to handle something so delicate, especially given his excellent grades. "Don't worry, Minerva," Dumbledore answered her concern. "He'll find a way to attend classes himself." Dumbledore's certainty suggested he knew more than he let on. Whatever the reason, it was his decision to make. Transfiguration ended, and the students poured out, gossiping about the prophecy. John quickly became the center of attention again. Malfoy, badge shining, sought him out. "What did you see?" he sneered. "I don't know," John admitted. "I just spoke what it showed me." This was the first time John had experienced the seer's glimpse, and he was unsure what was real. The images from the prophecy felt oddly familiar, as though he had seen them before. He ran a thumb over his chin and wondered whether the vision was simply pulling from some plot he'd encountered somewhere. A card, gifted by Trelawney to enhance the Eye of Heaven, spun between his fingers. The card bore an eye-like symbol that gave off a faint glow only he could see. John tucked it away. Professor Trelawney had a few tricks up her sleeve. Helping him with a prophecy once, and possessing an ancient card like this made her more complicated than she seemed. In the afternoon came Care of Magical Creatures, a class John felt confident about. With him watching, he believed Hagrid wouldn't suddenly have anyone riding Thestrals through the sky today. They walked out across damp grass toward Hagrid's hut near the Forbidden Forest. Malfoy, Daphne, Pansy, Goyle, and Crabbe followed. The Slytherin entourage was together. Malfoy immediately began his taunts, and Daphne drifted over to John. "I don't know how you put up with him," she complained. "Don't be fooled by Draco's airs," John said dryly. "He's a child at heart." Daphne rolled her eyes. Malfoy had already started dressing up like a Dementor to provoke Harry, who looked ready to draw his wand. Hagrid stood waiting by his hut, wearing his battered moleskin, and accompanied by Fang, who was huge even for a dog. Come on, hurry up," he boomed. I've got something to show you today. This class is amazing." Hearing the word amazing made John uneasy. He knew Hagrid well enough to suspect that whatever Hagrid called amazing was likely dangerous. Hagrid led them to the edge of the forbidden forest and stopped at a small empty paddock. "Gather round this fence," he told them, then added, "Open your textbooks." Malfoy drawled, "How do you open them?" The recent torment of the Monster Book of Monsters had left many students tying their books shut. Hagrid looked embarrassed. Clearly, he hadn't expected that. He searched the faces of the class until his hopeful eyes found John. John took the cue, produced the book, and said softly, "You just stroke its spine gently, so it purrs." He demonstrated. Hagrid whooped with joy. "Very well done. 10 points for Gryffindor." Relieved to be out of the bind, Hagrid regained his composure and walked off toward the forbidden forest with a bundle of chains in his hands. Malfoy opened his mouth to complain, but John looked at him and said, "Draco, quiet. Hagrid's a professor now. He can take points off." The threat of losing house points shut Malfoy up faster than any scolding. He settled back into his taunting, however, and kept prodding Harry from a safe distance. A dozen creatures burst into the paddock, bodies of horses with eagle heads and wings. Hagrid held up the chains and beamed. "Hippogriffs, aren't they beautiful?" He pulled his favorite forward and introduced it. "This is Buckbeak. First thing to know, they're very proud." After instructing them on how to approach the creatures, Hagrid looked for the first volunteer. He hesitated at John, then shook his head and called on Harry instead. Harry stepped forward, nervous but willing. Hagrid unfastened Buckbeak's leather collar and warned him, "You've met its gaze. Don't blink. If you keep blinking, the hippogriff won't trust you." Harry's eyes watered, but he kept them wide. Buckbeak turned its sharp head, those fierce orange eyes fixed on him. "That's right. Now bow," Hagrid coached, careful not to spook the creature. Harry bowed, quick and steady. He looked up, and his head remained exactly where it should be. Rimbert. 102. Section 102. Buckbeak stared at Harry, proudly frozen in place. Hagrid, nervous, urged, "Now, step back, Harry. Just slowly, mind you." He didn't want Harry to move too quickly. Hippogriffs didn't like sudden motions. As soon as Harry took a careful step back, Buckbeak bent his scaly forelegs and made a formal bow. Hagrid whooped, "Well done, Harry." The first class had gone so smoothly that Hagrid was certain everyone would love his subject. Flush with pride, he told Harry, "All right, you can touch him now. Pat his beak." It would have been safer for Harry to simply step away, but he reached out and patted Buckbeak. Hagrid, carried away with enthusiasm, then thrust Harry up onto Buckbeak's back. Harry was bewildered. Hagrid barked instructions and gave the hippogriff a sharp slap on the rump. Buckbeak launched into the air with Harry clinging to him. Harry circled once and came down, shaken but unharmed. Seeing that Harry was fine, Hagrid felt reassured and let the students choose a hippogriff to try. John chose a black one and approached, meeting its steady gaze. "This is easy," he thought. The sky brightened and the rain stopped. Malfoy, feeling cocky again, swaggered up to Buckbeak and completely forgot Hagrid's warning. John frowned. Malfoy was pushing his luck. Buckbeak, insulted that Malfoy hadn't bowed, lashed out with steel talons. Hagrid shouted at the top of his lungs, frantic that someone was about to be hurt. A red spell hit Malfoy before the claws could reach him, knocking him back so the talons missed. "My hand! I'm gonna die!" Malfoy howled theatrically. Hagrid rushed forward to soothe Buckbeak. John walked over, looked down at the still wailing Malfoy, and sighed. "Stop making a fuss. I used Expelliarmus, not Avada Kedavra." Grumbling, John hauled Malfoy to his feet. Only then did Malfoy realize he was perfectly fine, and the shame on his face was palpable. Daphne's scorn made him wish for a hole to crawl into. John added, dryly, "Seems your courage isn't quite there yet. Next time, try the Room of Requirement." John glanced at Malfoy, thinking that if he had paid attention in class, none of this would have happened. He glanced at Malfoy's two cronies, who looked ready to follow his lead, and felt a headache coming on. Because of John, Buckbeak escaped punishment that might have cost him dearly. He met Hagrid's mortified, grateful look, but said nothing. It was the first class. Hagrid deserved some dignity. If the lesson had gone badly, Hagrid would have been devastated. This job was his dream. By the end of the class, John realized he hadn't even ridden a hippogriff. He'd been too busy watching out for trouble. Hagrid felt guilty about the improvised arrangements and promised to adjust the curriculum. John reminded him he couldn't always be there to supervise. Afterward, Hagrid agreed to change upcoming lessons. Once that was settled, John went back to the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets and pulled some books from it. He spent the evening in the dormitory, devouring knowledge. Tom handed Daphne over to help walk the dog. The third day of school began with screams in the Great Hall. John went to see and found students reading the paper. News that Sirius had been spotted near Hogwarts and noticed by Muggles didn't worry him. Dementors were posted everywhere, and Sirius couldn't get in, even with Polyjuice. After breakfast, John noticed Heinrich sipping cautiously, as if he'd developed a sudden dislike of garlic essence. Morning was potions. Professor Snape was in an even worse mood than usual, but his attitude toward John had thawed slightly. John was at least a Slytherin rather than Gryffindor. It was unclear what had changed. John brewed the shrinking solution, and Snape awarded Slytherin 30 points. After 3 days, Slytherin had pulled ahead of the other houses. The afternoon held the most anticipated class of the year, Defense Against the Dark Arts. Given past professors, expectations were low. Then Lupin walked in carrying an old, battered suitcase that clearly wasn't big enough for his clothes. "Good afternoon, everyone. Put your textbooks away. Today is practical. We only need our wands." Practical class. The students looked at John. Besides him, there was now a professor who actually taught practical lessons. They tossed their books aside and followed Lupin down the corridor. Peeves, up to mischief, was jamming chewing gum into a keyhole. Only when Lupin was a few steps away did Peeves look up. Seeing Lupin, he began to sing, a taunt on his lips. But then Peeves saw John and shrieked, "No, no, John Wick is here. I've got to get out of here." Peeves fled like a frightened wind. Lupin stared in astonishment. Peeves had never reacted like that in his day. Lupin turned to John. "I remember you are John Wick," he said. "Seems Peeves is very afraid of you." John blinked. He hadn't done anything dramatic, just once caught Peeves and tried a few spells to stop him. Apparently, Peeves had poor nerves indeed, treating John as if he were the Dark Lord. The exchange reminded Lupin of something Professor Flitwick had told him. If there's anything you don't understand, you can consult John Wick. He was the Defense Against the Dark Arts assistant last year. A teacher consulting a student. Lupin regarded John with new curiosity, but didn't press. They passed another corridor and reached the staff room, where Snape was already waiting. The air between Lupin and Snape crackled with old grudges. Snape's poisonous remarks even lashed Neville, making Harry clench his fist. As Snape turned to leave, he paused deliberately by John. "You ought to discover what he is. Certain people, certain identities," he said, cuttingly. It was an awkward, meaningless hint that Lupin was a problem. John had an odd expression. He half understood. After all, Snape knew about Lupin's condition. He'd sponsored the Wolfsbane potion once. Snape saw John's reaction, gave him a long look, and left. Soon Lupin's class began. At the far end of the room stood a familiar old wardrobe, inside which, last year, had lurked the boggart John had faced. Lupin's first lesson was how to deal with a boggart. Chapter 18, A Lively Lesson in Thoughts. The wardrobe trembled. Lupin had expected to frighten the students, but they seemed calm enough to surprise him. He explained evenly, "Don't be afraid, there's a boggart inside." He looked around. "Can anyone tell me, what is a boggart?" Hands shot up. One belonged, of course, to Hermione Granger, the other to John. Lupin paused, then called on Hermione. Her face lit up, and she rattled off, "Boggarts like dark, enclosed spaces, wardrobes, under beds, cupboards beneath sinks." "A boggart is a shapeshifter," she added confidently. "It becomes whatever will frighten you most." "I couldn't have put it better myself," Lupin said, pleased. Hermione beamed. He walked to the trembling wardrobe and continued, "So the boggart in this dark cupboard doesn't have a fixed form yet. It doesn't know what people outside are afraid of, and no one can say what a boggart looks like on its own." John couldn't help but pout inwardly. He had seen a boggart up close. He had researched them thoroughly. With a clumency, he could keep it from reading his mind, and with a disillusionment charm, a boggart couldn't detect him at all. When he had stayed in the same cupboard with a boggart, it had looked like gathered black smoke, an inky, shifting cloud. Lupin tapped the wardrobe with his wand. As soon as I let it out, it will turn into the form each of us fears most. That means we have a great advantage over a boggart, he added with a smile, and looked for volunteers. Hermione was practically on tiptoe, hand raised. John also lifted his, but Lupin's eyes landed on Harry. Harry, he said, have you noticed this advantage? Harry, surprised to be called on, peered at Hermione and stammered, because there are so many of us, it doesn't know what shape to take? Section 103. It had to be said, Harry really was a born Auror. His instincts were razor sharp, and he immediately hit on the right answer. Professor Lupin praised him aloud. Very good. Hermione let her hand drop, a little disappointed. John lowered his as well and watched Lupin. The old professor was clearly pleased with his friend's son. He patted the wardrobe casually and said with a grin, once I encountered a boggart that tried to scare two people at once. It turned into half a slug, not very frightening. The spell to repel a boggart is simple, but it requires strong willpower, Lupin continued, smiling. What really defeats a boggart is laughter. You have to force it to change into something you find funny. He raised his wand and moved to the front to demonstrate. Wands out, everyone. First, we'll practice the spell. Repeat after me. Ridiculous. The students found Professor Lupin far better than the previous two Defense Against the Dark Arts teachers. Their enthusiasm rose, and they shouted together, Ridiculous! Very good, excellent. That's the easy part, Lupin said. But remember, the charm alone isn't enough. Laughing is the key to beating a boggart. Neville, your turn. Neville froze when called. He stepped forward, nervous but not panic-stricken. Lupin's voice was gentle. Neville, what do you fear most? Neville's mouth moved, and he glanced toward John before whispering, Professor Snape. Lupin chuckled. Snape's popularity had never recovered. Neville had almost said John, but the look John gave him made Neville settle on only one name. The surrounding students burst out laughing at the idea of Snape as a boggart. Even a few Slytherins laughed. John noticed them and thought, you really aren't afraid of death. Lupin had Neville picture his grandmother's clothes and allowed himself a small, mischievous grin. As a former marauder, he still had that Gryffindor streak for pushing boundaries. He opened the wardrobe and a hand pushed the door. John internally froze. Oh no, Professor Snape is coming out of the closet. The Snape that emerged was disturbingly lifelike, a menacing glare on its face. Neville, braver after the training, raised his wand. Ridiculous. The boggart took one step, and its robes instantly transformed into an outrageous red and green dress. The room erupted in laughter. Lupin laughed the loudest. As the boggart stood bewildered, he waved his hand and said, Parvati, go! Everyone relaxed. They took turns. The boggart kept changing, continually mocked by the students' imaginations. When it was Ron's turn, it predictably became a giant spider. His ridiculous made its legs vanish. It flopped to the floor and rolled to Harry's feet. Harry moved to act as the boggart began to change again. Just then, Lupin lunged forward, and the creature froze into a silvery white sphere, then quickly into a balloon that floated over to John. For a moment it hung in front of him, and then began to change wildly, as if losing control. It shifted through incoherent forms, and finally into something that resembled nothing anyone had seen before. Even Lupin was stunned. No one had ever seen a boggart like that. A thought occurred to John. What would happen if he imagined the boggart's original form? Even Lupin never saw a boggart's true self. John didn't mind letting everyone know. He built the image of the boggart's original shape in his mind. The boggart's frantic transformations stopped. Then, almost immediately, it scurried back into the wardrobe and slammed the door shut. The class stood dumbfounded. Why had the boggart run away? John looked thoughtful and muttered, Seems even a boggart that peers into others' hearts won't accept its original self. Lupin wasn't sure how to judge the outcome. If it failed, the creature ran off. If it succeeded, John hadn't moved his wand. He hesitated, but the class ended before he could decide properly. He awarded Gryffindor 5 points, and Hermione, Harry, and Neville each received a few as well. Homework: an essay on boggarts. Malfoy loudly accused Lupin of favoring Gryffindor and of ignoring John when he raised his hand, claiming the house was stealing the glory. The Slytherins agreed. They all thought John had been the most remarkable. John, though, was thinking of something else. Boggarts peer into the heart. Dementors drain souls and happiness. What if I combine the two? His eyes shone. He had a method he wanted to try. Chapter 119. Capturing Dementors and Abstract Boggarts. A week into term, Professor Lupin's teaching was universally praised. Neville's Snape in a Dress episode followed him into Potions, where Snape scolded him repeatedly and glared with that sinister stare. Snape took back most of the points Gryffindor had won in Lupin's class. John, meanwhile, turned in exceptional homework and continued to rack up points for Slytherin. Professor Snape's attitude toward him warmed, while Heinrich, competent in everything but disliked by many, kept to himself and looked down on others. The twins amused themselves by slipping garlic into Heinrich's food. He came to be whispered about as Slytherin's vampire. Once a quarrel in charms had to be broken up by Professor Flitwick. One night, John slipped out of the dormitory, not to the room of requirement as some might expect, but out of the castle altogether. Dementors patrolled outside. He cast a disillusionment charm on himself. Dumbledore had said such things were useless against Dementors, but Dementors respond to emotion, especially happiness, which they feed on. John activated occlumency and sealed himself off like a steel drum, airtight, no feeling escaping. He had studied the Dementor's patrol route and set a trap. A drifting Dementor passed slowly by. John cracked his mind open a tiny amount so the creature could smell something, and it halted. Hungry after its time in Azkaban, it slithered toward the scent. As it approached, John shut his mind tight again. The scent disappeared and the Dementor lingered, confused. When it reached the trap, an innocuous-looking box he'd prepared, it hesitated. The lid sprang open as the Dementor reached out, and a suction force yanked the creature in, as if a vacuum had engulfed it. The box slammed shut, and a dozen locks clanked into place, sealing the Dementor inside. Success! John breathed. He levitated the box back to the castle and deposited it in the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets. He had already modified the chamber. Books on souls floated in the air, and he skimmed through one, flipping pages until he found entries about Dementors. The Dementor's structure lies between soul and flesh, one volume read. It resembles a ghost, but has greater power. John let his hand rest on a silver skull in the room and thought. A soft clang echoed through the chamber. Beside the box, an old wardrobe sat in the corner, and another idea struck him. What would happen if a boggart met a Dementor? He made himself invisible with a disillusionment charm and sealed his emotions with occlumency, then opened the box in the wardrobe. The locks on the box clicked open, and the wardrobe's door creaked. The Dementor drifted out. From the wardrobe came a cloud of black smoke that twisted and convulsed until it formed a grotesque, distorted black albatross. They faced each other. Neither had eyes, but both gave the impression of staring. The Dementor glided. The boggart's albatross flapped, as if imitating something. John's mouth twitched. The boggart seemed to be mimicking his Patronus. It was no coincidence. The Dementor he had trapped was one of the creatures he had driven away on the train. The image the boggart gave him was blurred, but even in that haze, Johnny could tell. Dementors could think. He didn't want to watch two abstract figures drifting about, so he waved his wand, and the two apparitions snapped back into their respective places. He closed the box and the cabinet, sat on the crate, stroked his chin, and murmured, "It's very fuzzy. Their inner selves aren't clear." It felt like madness. In some way, their souls were damaged. The only certain thing was both showed something like legilimency. The more he thought about it, the more complicated it became, and Johnny sighed. This is going to take time. To solve Nagini's soul problem, he still needed far more research. He left the Chamber of Secrets and told himself he'd come back every day to study the pair. Days ticked by. September 19th. While Hermione was eating in the Great Hall, an owl arrived with a present. Hermione recognized the bird and cried out, "Basil!" Harry and Ron looked up as Basil flapped between plates and wound his way to Hermione. Ron remembered his own raucous owl, who would sometimes dive bill first into a bowl. Hermione reached out and stroked Basil's head and then opened the parcel. Inside was a delicate glass orb, a tiny starry sky suspended within it. A card fell out. Ron picked it up and read the single line in Johnny's handwriting, "Happy birthday." Ron scowled for no good reason. "Lucky you. He even knows your birthday." Hermione shot him a glare. "I told you at the start of term, you weren't listening." Harry and Ron fell quiet, a little ashamed. Harry turned the globe over in his hands and wondered how Johnny, who came from a Muggle family as far as he knew, could afford something like it. He recalled Johnny lending him 100 galleons and felt a prickle of curiosity about where Johnny's money came from. Ron, meanwhile, was more concerned with whether he could borrow Hermione's astronomy notes later. Hermione went to thank Johnny in person. He waved her off. She needn't make a fuss. "By the way," he asked, "where's your cat? Why didn't you bring him?" Johnny liked that flat-faced cat, smarter than Tom, and its fur looked very soft. Hermione's face dimmed. Crookshanks had spent recent days trying to catch Scabbers, which got Ron furious, so she'd kept him in the common room. "He keeps going after Scabbers," she explained, "so I have to keep him locked up." "You can't blame a cat for being a cat," Johnny said. Then he spotted Tom darting past Hermione's feet and decided to change the subject. "You go to the library a lot. If you like, I can feed him for you." Hermione hesitated. She wasn't sure Crookshanks would leave the Gryffindor common room. Later that afternoon, she caught Johnny again and apologized. "Crookshanks doesn't like leaving the common room." "All right." Johnny produced a small satchel and took out cat treats and some dried fish. "Then take these to him." Hermione stared at the satchel. It seemed to hold far more than its size suggested. Johnny felt a little regretful that he still hadn't gotten to pet Crookshanks, but at least he had treats. Chapter 120, Rebuffed and Experiment. Filch was in his office, eating ice cream with a rare, contented smile. Madame Norris mewed and accepted cat treats from his hand. Ice cream in one hand and biscuits in the other, Filch was at the pinnacle of domestic bliss. To Johnny's surprise, Filch's favorite flavor turned out to be mapo tofu ice cream. It widened Johnny's view of wizarding tastes. While fussing over Madame Norris, Johnny noticed a purple corner of paper peeking from a drawer. Curiosity got the better of him, and he pulled it free. Filch, still licking his cone, didn't notice until Johnny had the envelope in his hand. On it was printed, "Quick spell." Filch's face went through a new shade of furious. "Give it to me," he barked and flung Johnny out. Filch had been stung by life as a squib. No one wanted magic more than he did, yet he had none. He'd been driven from his family, taken in by Hogwarts, and set to his work, watching students, keeping rules, resenting every time others made magic look effortless. It was easier to find fault than to face his own lack. Johnny, who never flaunted magic and whose company Madame Norris enjoyed, was one of the few students Filch didn't outright hate. Kicked out of the office, Johnny strode away and spotted Tom again. "Don't wander too far. Don't get caught by a Dementor," he told the cat, half like a worried parent. Tom would likely go find Fang. He wasn't likely to go far. Distance, Johnny thought, softened attachments. Tom no longer seemed to care for the big black dog. At the library entrance, Johnny handed Madame Pince a note that bore a professor's signature and a small box with 2 ice cream cones. Madame Pince peered over the top of her glasses, glanced sourly at the ice cream, then at Johnny. "No eating in the library," she said flatly. "I know," Johnny replied. "They're for you." Madame Pince inspected the cones, then the note. The ice cream had been magically charmed not to melt for days. She plucked the note from his hand, read it, and said, without inflection, "It's expired." "What?" Johnny blinked. Madame Pince tapped the name on the parchment. "Gilderoy Lockhart's signature doesn't count." The realization hit Johnny like a cold draft. His era of easy access at Hogwarts was over. He'd been turned away again. He barely had time to feel dejected before voices floated from the staff room, Professor Snape's sharp sarcasm and Professor Lupin's milder tones. "Lupin, it seems Johnny Silverhand's arrival has made your life a little different," Snape sneered. Lupin's reply was guarded. "Mr. Silverhand has been helpful in some ways." Snape's lips tightened. He leaned in as if to grovel and hissed, "Don't think I don't know why you're here. As soon as that man escaped Azkaban, you come to Hogwarts. Don't tell me it's a coincidence." "It was a coincidence, Severus," Lupin said calmly. "Don't call me Severus." Snape's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "I'll be watching you. You've learned a lot from Johnny Silverhand, haven't you? That cruel fellow. Perhaps he even helped you rescue your good friend." The air turned hard as Snape spat the last words. Lupin's face flushed. Whatever memory Snape had invoked cut deep. Snape sneered, savoring the discomfort, then stalked away like a great black bat. He opened the door to find Johnny standing there. His triumphant look vanished. "Mr. Silverhand," he said coldly, "I think you should know eavesdropping is wrong." Johnny raised his hands a little. "Professor Snape, I came to see you about something." Snape regarded him for a moment, then said, "Come into my office." Once inside, Johnny explained he wanted to borrow books from the restricted section. Snape's response was a derisive little laugh. "I find it hard to believe a third year has the capacity to make use of those books." And that was that. Johnny was shown out. It was the third time he'd been rebuffed that day. He stood on the castle steps, hands clenched. Everyone seemed determined to shut him out. He took a breath and pushed the anger down. The restricted section would not remain barred forever. He'd been sneaking about at night before. If necessary, he'd do it again. Section 105. Tom behaved obediently and didn't stray far. He carried the bag of dog food and ran all the way to the Homping Willow. His short legs moved with an agility that belied his size, and he slipped into the secret passage beneath the tree without spilling a single bit. John loved to tease Malfoy with, "My dog behaves better than you," and today Tom proved it. Tom hurried on through the passage to the shrieking shack. A large black dog was resting inside. Its fur had been shedding, but when it saw Tom approach, a joyful look brightened its face. Tom set the food down, tore the bag open, and the big dog hurried forward to eat. Tom's tail thumped like a little propeller. After the dog had finished, it even spoke to Tom, and Tom nodded now and then as if answering. John, however, had hit a wall in his work 3 times that day, so he retreated to the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets to study a Dementor properly. He was using the creature as a test subject. He opened the box. The Dementor slithered out, and John extended his wand, twisting it as if turning a key. "Soul, return." The spirit charm took hold. The Dementor stiffened, and something seemed to heave beneath its ragged robes. John increased the pressure. The Dementor let out a piercing scream that made his teeth ache. John flicked his wand and shoved it back. The body and soul are tightly entwined. To draw the soul out, you have to rip it open. He savored the sensation, as though the soul were glued in place with some horrid, powerful adhesive. Calmly, he tried again. He released the Dementor and plugged his ears, casting the spirit charm once more. The force began to tear the creature in two. Just as success seemed within reach, his hand trembled. The Dementor fell silent, and its body dissolved into a thick, inky smoke. "Dead?" John muttered, staring at the vanished mist, rubbing his throbby temples. He hadn't intended to kill it. Now he'd have to catch another. It had felt similar to pulling a soul free, yet also more, like dismantling something assembled rather than born. There was no one around, so he took parchment and notes. The Boggart's box no longer trembled, as if it sensed that something terrible had occurred. After all, a boggart was a timid thing, only changing shape to frighten people. John carried the box out and fell back on an old trick. Catch a Dementor outside the castle and bring it back to the chamber to continue his experiments. Sometime later, the Ministry of Magic noticed that a few Dementors had gone missing. Chapter 121, The Case of the Missing Dementors and Jealousy. "Cornelius, I told you, I did not touch the Dementors." In the headmaster's office, Dumbledore had a headache. Sitting opposite him was the portly Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, whose face was flushed with discomfort. Fudge, in his bowler hat, raised his voice. "Who else could make 3 Dementors vanish without a trace, if not you?" The Ministry's first suspect was Dumbledore. The headmaster had publicly voiced his dislike of Dementors on more than one occasion, and apart from Dumbledore, Fudge could not think of anyone with that ability. Strictly speaking, Azkaban's Dementors and the Ministry were not in a chain of command, but in a cooperative arrangement. The Ministry provided prisoners as sustenance, and the Dementors guarded those prisoners. Fudge had come storming to Dumbledore in a panic. If the Dementors went on strike, the prisoners at Azkaban might escape, and under Fudge's watch that had to be avoided at all costs. Dumbledore rubbed his temple and answered wearily, "Cornelius, there may be others besides me. Apart from the Patronus charm, there could be other magic that harms Dementors." Fudge's eyes widened with a fearful denial. "Impossible. We all know. He can't come back." The name on the tip of his tongue was unsaid but present, and then another thought seized him. "No, Sirius. It must be Sirius," He brightened at the idea and started to pace. He's lurking nearby and did it. Fudge's voice rose as if he were trying to convince himself more than Dumbledore. In the end, he slammed the door and left, still muttering accusations. Dumbledore watched him go and sighed inwardly. Everything has changed, he thought. He remembered a different Cornelius, the man he had once helped into office, and felt a pang of regret. Power and comfort had softened Fudge into cowardice. Then, believing stability was best for the wizarding world, Dumbledore had quietly used his influence to support Fudge's rise. In retrospect, he wondered whether he had been mistaken. He had always distrusted power for its own sake. It had been a poison in his younger years, and he knew too well how ambition could corrupt. He touched the small golden hourglass on his desk with a fingertip, as if speaking to himself, and murmured, "I hope you won't be like that." Images brushed his mind. A brilliant young man, a student in a Hogwarts uniform with a hidden face. Their shapes overlapped, and then another figure appeared. Dumbledore tried to see more clearly, but his old eyes were dim, and he only glimpsed a back, retreating into the possibilities of the future. He looked at the Sorting Hat and the Gryffindor sword and wondered, can a phoenix, old and weak, still rise from the ashes? Meanwhile, John had encountered Minister Fudge only once before. Today, Fudge's face looked sour, as if he'd eaten a badly made canary cream. John shrugged when he saw it. The minister had probably been rebuffed by Dumbledore. Back in the Slytherin common room, another sour face greeted him, Daphne's. Her beauty seemed to crease into irritation. As a younger student who relied on Daphne's help in class, John leaned over. "What's wrong? Did Tom ruin your notes?" The last time she had been this upset had indeed been because Tom had messed up Daphne's carefully organized notes. At the time she'd chased the dog around in a fury, Tom, thinking it a game, had frolicked until John finally scooped him up. John had had to clean up after his pet and promised, half in jest, "I'll make Tom do a somersault for you. Don't be angry with the dog." Daphne narrowed her eyes at him and said, in a deliberately exaggerated high voice that made John shiver, "Thank you, John." She dragged the words out and then turned away with a long face, snorting. John stood there, puzzled. Had she wanted the somersault or not? The next day, he decided to perform anyway. After Daphne sat down in the great hall, a few seats from him, John bent close and whispered, "Come with me. I'll show you something." Daphne's expression shifted. A hopeful smile blossomed, and she told her friend Pansy she was going. Pansy gave a knowing look, then glanced over at Malfoy, who was loudly plotting with his cronies about how to handle the Gryffindor juniors. She looked like she wanted to catapult a plate of roast potatoes at him. John led Daphne to the covered bridge, a seldom-used place of stone and wood. The morning breeze brushed Daphne's cheek and lifted John's longer black hair, catching a ray of sunlight that made his features glow. His hair fell over his warm brown eyes, and Daphne felt suddenly flustered. She tried to act composed and stammered, "Gee, John, what are you going to show me?" She was pretending to be casual because her mother had told her that forwardness wasn't proper. John looked steadily into her light gray blue eyes and smiled in a way that made her heart stutter. "I know what's been bothering you," he said, "and I think I know how to help." Perhaps his gaze was too intent. Daphne looked away, cheeks flushing. John grinned and snapped his fingers. Music, coming from nowhere it seemed, began to play. Daphne froze. "Watch closely. Tom, to make it up to you, specially trained for this, eating dog food while standing on his head." John beamed and pointed. Tom trotted over, gripping his bowl in his mouth, tore the bag open, dumped the kibble in, and with a powerful push from his front paws, launched into a handstand. His hind legs floated in the air, his long ears flopped as he chewed every last piece. For a moment, everything was silent, except for John's excitable encouragement. "Come on, Tom, eat up. You can do it, Tom, believe in yourself. Go, 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 you're going to be king of Earth dogs." But Daphne's shy, hopeful expression had hardened into something close to contempt. She watched the performing dog, and a cold sneer twitched at one corner of her mouth. "How about that?" "Impressive, right?" John said, proud as if he'd taught a dragon to dance. Tom finished the food, and John chuckled. Daphne let out a thin, sarcastic laugh, and in that same high, drawn-out voice, repeated, "Thank you, John." The words hung in the air awkwardly, and John couldn't help thinking, Why did that sound so false? John scratched his head, feeling awkward, and said cautiously, "Actually, Tom can do a one-handed handstand while eating dog food." "Thank you, John." Daphne cut him off and turned away before he could finish. John flicked an eyebrow at Tom, who was already wagging his tail, and announced loudly, "You're completely wrong." Daphne stopped in her tracks, thinking perhaps John had finally gotten the point, but she quickly realized she was overthinking it. John pulled a ludicrous dog-like face and demanded, "You've been eating twice as much dog food lately. How come you haven't put on any weight?" Tom's adoring expression froze, and he lowered his head guiltily. Daphne's footsteps grew heavier, as if she were stomping in anger. At John, apparently. This dog-like fellow even kept track of how much Tom ate, yet he couldn't figure out why she was upset. John was the sort who oscillated between being meticulous and carelessly oblivious. He vaguely remembered where he'd heard Daphne's sarcastic charm. "Didn't Hermione say that to me on her birthday?" he wondered. A little puzzled, he considered why it sounded familiar. Hermione had indeed said something similar. Maybe she thought he shouldn't give gifts to Gryffindors? After thinking it over, John decided that was very likely. As one of Slytherin's leading young members, even though he'd softened Slytherin's attitudes toward Muggles and half-bloods, their rivalry with Gryffindor hadn't changed. Slytherin and Gryffindor, it was always one stepping on the other. It was ingrained. So he hadn't done anything wrong. No betrayal here. Innocent, he told himself. I should report this to the organization. Still, John decided he ought to apologize, if only to make amends for canceling Muggle studies the session before. He found Daphne and said earnestly, "Daphne, I know I've been a bit off lately. I'm sorry." He was so serious that Daphne, suddenly guilty about her own petty behavior, blushed. "I was wrong too. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that," she admitted, rubbing her face as if to smooth out the sneer she'd worn for days. John nodded in understanding. It was like Professor Snape was around. Daphne's mouth fell open. Before John could figure out why she reacted so strongly, a cold, silky voice came from behind them. "In that case, Mr. Wick, you'll have to find someone else to sign your permission slip." John felt a chill run down his spine. He turned awkwardly, and there stood Professor Snape in his black robes, wearing that expression that meant he was not pleased. Swallowing, John blurted, foolishly, "Hello, Professor. I was just, admiring your handsome looks." The lie was so transparent, even Daphne winced. Snape's mouth twitched. He tossed a slip of paper onto the floor at John's feet, gave him a long, cold look, and left. In an instant, all the goodwill John had been carefully building evaporated. John's face registered annoyance more than embarrassment. He picked up the slip. Snape's signature was scrawled across it. "What does this mean?" he muttered to himself. A few days ago, Snape wouldn't sign. Now he'd handed over a note on a whim. Was the potions master playing games? Snape wasn't a girl. What was the point of playing hard to get? Whatever the reason, John now had the permission slip. He had been busy experimenting with Dementors lately and hadn't had time to visit the restricted section until now. With the slip in hand, he ran off toward the library. Daphne reached out her hand in a vain attempt to stop him, then stomped her foot in frustration. October at Hogwarts moved on. Defense against the dark arts taught by Lupin was as excellent as ever. John admitted that Lupin was a natural teacher, kind, confident, and capable of making lessons both entertaining and instructive. John admired him a great deal. He habitually fiddled with his wand. If he had a ring, he would rub it. Otherwise, he rubbed his wand. By the time he graduated, the wood would no doubt be worn smooth. Divination was also going surprisingly well. John's extra credit seemed endless, and Professor Trelawney had started addressing him not as child, but as dear. Care of magical creatures was progressing smoothly too. Hagrid brought in beautiful, almost fairy-like beasts that the girls adored, and some less lethal creatures that were oddly popular with everyone. Hagrid grumbled to John about student tastes, and John deadpanned, "You still want to bring a dragon for them?" Hagrid's eyes lit up at the idea, and then he hesitated. "One dragon be fine, but more than that I can't manage," John thought. Good heavens, him dreaming big. If Hagrid actually brought a dragon, John was sure Hogwarts would be in uproar. Dangerous creatures for field trips? No way. Between classes, he walked past the Quidditch pitch. During training season, the ground was always full of brooms, rain or shine. Brooms zipped across the field, chasing bludgers and a quaffle, and high above Hufflepuff figures carved the air. Cedric, who'd sparred with John at dueling last year, had taken over the Hufflepuff captaincy. He wasn't as intuitively brilliant as Harry, but his technique, especially his turns, was smooth and surprisingly agile for his size. Cedric spotted John and waved. John gave a short cheer in return. Madame Pince at the library was startled when John requested a copy of The Origin and Speculation of Dementors, an obscure book, to say the least. "You shouldn't be interested in Dementors," she admonished, unusually chatty. "They're dangerous." John flashed a grin. "One can never have too much knowledge." Madame Pince nodded, and as she left, she said, conversationally, "The ice cream you sent last time, especially the red one, was very good." John stared. Madame Pince liked mapo tofu-flavored ice cream? The same odd taste Filch favored? He eyed her suspiciously. Crossing the pitch again, he saw the yellow jerseys had become red. Wood, Oliver Wood, in his final year, was shouting at the Gryffindor team to be sharper, while Harry searched relentlessly for the golden snitch. The Weasley twins were practicing a pincer move, boxing players in from both sides. John stopped to watch for a moment until Wood noticed and shooed him away. Even though John was unlikely to betray tactics to Slytherins, Wood didn't like being watched. John had thought briefly of joining the Quidditch team, but his schedule was already overflowing. "If only I could control time," he sighed. "An item like that would solve everything." But time was a taboo subject in the wizarding world, as dangerous as meddling with souls. One couldn't simply take it. Back in the castle, John made for the Slytherin common room and opened the book he had borrowed. The first line that snagged him read, "Dementors are a fusion of soul and matter." He felt his pulse quicken. He had encountered that phenomenon during his own experiments with Dementors. The author went on, "They are man-made, cruel, and pitiful creatures. Their intelligence is tragically low. They do not reproduce biologically." John read on. "Dementors," the book argued, "were creations of human artifice rather than natural monsters. They had no gender and no concept of reproduction. They arose like a blight from places of dark decay, feeding on the souls of the living." The comparison made his scalp prickle. Who would create such things? The book named a first inhabitant of Azkaban, Extus. The creation process, it explained, boiled down to 2 steps, combining tortured souls with a binding curse. Extus had killed and tortured countless muggles, using dark arts to bind their souls so they could not find peace. Trapped between reality and a washed-out illusion, these souls could not pass on. Over time, they devolved into entities that fed on other souls, Dementors. "If evil has a hierarchy," the author wrote, "then Extus sits at the top." John read that and felt a chill. To make Dementors from souls of the tortured, he recoiled even as his fascination grew. Even he, experimenting as he did with Dementors, would not wish such a thing on anyone. 107. Section 107. The instant the thought popped into John's head, he froze and muttered suspiciously, "Wait, why would I even think that?" "I'm a good person," he insisted to himself. "If I become something great, I'll be the White Magic King, not the Dark Lord. I'm not tied to evil." He closed the book and exhaled. The volume had detailed not only the origin of Dementors, but also Extus's deeds and history. If Voldemort had killed to rule the wizarding world, Extus had been evil for no reason at all, completely self-absorbed and mad. Luckily, he died young, John thought. If he'd lived, Voldemort might have had to step aside. October arrived, and with it the usual excitement among the third years. Halloween meant a trip to Hogsmeade, the only all-wizarding village, full of shops worth visiting, honeydukes, zonkos, and more. John listened to his housemates' plans and wondered if he should go. He was curious, but his focus was elsewhere. Nagini's condition. How long could she hold on? A week? A month? The unicorn horn had bought time, but not much. Nagini's soul flickered like a candle in the wind. He had to finish the surgery soon. He had other reasons too: the reward, his academic ambitions, and a promise to a friend. Entering the Slytherin common room, John caught sight of Tom sneaking out. "Is this mutt sneaking off to see another mutt?" he thought with a frown. Tom left carrying dog food, and John couldn't help but be suspicious. Who else had a dog besides him? Maybe Fang's flattery had gone straight to Tom's head, Perhaps the dog was simply pampering his master. Classes were a different kind of trouble. Several of them overlapped this year, and John had to concentrate like mad to follow 3 lessons at once. Missing details meant losing rare extra points, and his place at the top of the year was always at stake. The pressure made him want to lie down and give up, but he pushed on, racing from one classroom to the next during breaks. One morning, he woke a bit late and ran into Hermione on her way to class. "You're going to class? Oh, forgot you took all the electives too," he said. "Sorry, John. I'm running late," she replied and hurried off. He watched her go, puzzled. Class hadn't even started. It looked like she was heading toward arithmancy. Was she skipping divination? But when he reached divination, Hermione was already seated. John blinked. He hadn't seen her enter. After the lesson, Hermione rushed out, and a short while later, John nearly ran into her again down the corridor. She looked tired and hurried, her pace noticeably faster than usual. John scratched his chin. Why's Hermione acting so odd, he wondered. This had happened before. Every time classes began, she seemed off. The strangest thing was how she managed to be in more than one place at once. Did she have remote monitoring, or could she clone herself? He decided to keep an eye on her. He did more than that. When he next suspected impersonation or a polyjuice prank, he slipped out the Marauder's map. The sight on the parchment made him swear under his breath. 3 Hermiones stared back at him, 3 tiny labeled figures in 3 different classrooms: divination, arithmancy, and Muggle studies. John was stunned. Hermione had somehow managed to be in 3 places at once. If she'd possessed that ability all along, why hadn't she said so? The idea of juggling 3 classes on his own suddenly felt ridiculous. After lessons, he intercepted Hermione in a corridor. "Hermione, can you clone yourself?" he asked bluntly. Her face registered confusion at first, then she visibly remembered a warning from Professor McGonagall and clamped her mouth shut. She pursed her lips and said, "I have my own methods, John. Please, don't ask." He squinted at her, waited a beat, and then sighed. "All right, it's a secret." He left, thinking he was the one being kept out. He suspected Dumbledore or McGonagall had forbidden her from explaining. Whatever it wasn't something professors like to let out. Professors playing favorites again, he muttered, but then he brightened. If they wouldn't show him, he could make his own solution. With his alchemy skills, what couldn't he create? Fresh from class, John slipped into the Chamber of Secrets beneath Slytherin's common room and updated his alchemy. Level 5. The panel dimmed in places, reminding him he still needed more theory to advance further. But being level 5 already felt powerful. He looked around the clean, well-kept chamber and frowned. It was inconvenient to have to slip through the forbidden forest every day just to get to certain places. Last time he'd nearly been discovered by a centaur, his disillusionment charm had saved him. If he could, he would modify the entrance and install an actual door. He set to work. Slytherin's existing alchemy and wards were advanced, on par with or better than his own, but he didn't need to tear anything down. He only had to add a smooth, hidden passage. After a while, the new door stood in place, and John enchanted it with an entry and exit password so he wouldn't have to crawl through pipes anymore. He didn't forget the girls' bathroom either. He modified that entrance too and set a private spell only he knew. "Constellation Eternal," he whispered, and the door obeyed. He stepped through and found himself in the girls' bathroom. It was empty. Myrtle normally lurked there, but at that moment she rose from the broken toilet, hairpin still in place, grinning at him. "You came to see me?" she squealed. You could say that?" John answered, glancing toward the chamber entrance. He couldn't exactly say he was just passing by. "Long time no see," he added more politely. Myrtle was delighted. She had shown off the hairpin he'd given her to the other ghosts, who'd been a mix of impressed and incredulous. Nearly headless Nick even bragged that he was jealous and joked that John should cut off his connecting skin so he could join the headless hunt. John listened and thought the ghosts hadn't changed much in centuries. Even small novelties excited them. Myrtle kept hinting at wanting nicer things, a necklace, thinner spectacles, but John explained the materials weren't easy to come by. Eventually, she gave up that line of pleading. Later, back in the room of requirement, John started planning again. Should he create his own chamber of secrets? The four founders had hidden places. When he formed the Constellation Society in the future, he would need a secure base. With his alchemy and rune-crafting skills, building a chamber wouldn't be impossible. Officially, the Constellation Society had only 2 members so far, Fleur and Heinrich, and a few candidates. He had 3 spots in mind: Percy from Gryffindor, Draco Malfoy from Slytherin, and Neville Longbottom. Percy was ambitious, a glory seeker who'd earned a dozen certifications, useful for getting into the ministry. Malfoy, a pureblood and part of the Sacred 28, had connections and prestige, useful as a bargaining chip when they needed to manipulate power later. Neville, destined to be the Sword Saint of Gryffindor, was one of the few besides Dumbledore who might draw Gryffindor's sword. His potential was huge. Daphne and Hermione had crossed John's mind too, but he judged Hermione unlikely to join. He reserved those 3 slots and continued to sketch plans for the chamber and the society, deliberate, practical steps toward building the network he wanted. Section 108. Not to mention that the trio would inevitably side with Dumbledore's faction. Hermione herself wouldn't abandon Harry to join the Constellation Society. Cedric is good too, but we haven't interacted much, John mused, stroking his chin. He had seen Cedric's skill and knew he was well-liked in Hufflepuff. He wasn't sure whether Cedric would accept an invitation. After running candidates through his head, John still hadn't chosen the remaining members. Let's stick with these initial recruits for now, he decided. I'll send more invitations once the Chamber of Secrets is finished. Having made up his mind, John left the Room of Requirement to fetch construction materials. As the Constellation Society's base, he didn't want it to look shabby. He stopped by Hagrid's hut and asked Hagrid to help find mostly wood. Hagrid thumped his chest and swore he would. As they talked, Hagrid kept nudging John to go, as if he couldn't wait for him to leave. John glanced inside a little uneasily. Fang was there. Fang's in here, so who is Tom playing with? He wondered aloud, puzzled. Back in Slytherin, John began disappearing for chunks of time, and even Malfoy sometimes couldn't find him. Lupin's excellent teaching more than made up for the gaps in defense against the dark arts over the past 2 years. October pressed on toward Halloween. The castle felt full of festive energy, as if Sirius lurking outside couldn't touch it. Dementors outside grew restless, sniffing at the happy emotions spilling from the castle. In the Gryffindor common room, Hermione's cat Crookshanks attacked Scabbers again, and this time Ron flew into a rage. He grabbed Crookshanks' carrier, intending to throw the cat out, and argued loudly with Hermione. Hermione stormed off in tears. Ron sulked. Harry was caught between them, wanting to say something but not knowing what. On the Quidditch pitch, Wood once again warned Harry to be wary of Cedric from Hufflepuff. Harry wasn't sure he was listening. His mind kept circling back to his friend's argument. The next day, Lavender Brown was inconsolable. Her rabbit had died on October 16th. Some students were baffled, but those who'd taken divination provided the answer. John predicted it, they said. He had a vision in class, something Lavender feared would happen on October 16th. A chill ran through everyone. The accuracy of that prediction made John's earlier seer-like trances seem real. He had gone into a prophetic state twice in divination class, once predicting a full moon and once predicting October 16th. If one had come true, perhaps the other would as well. Those who do not know the truth will lose a leg, and those who violate taboos will be submerged by a black tide, Ernie said in a low, theatrical voice as he discussed the prophecy. This is a death prophecy. I think it might be about Harry Potter. Hannah Abbott asked, confused. Why Harry Potter? Have you forgotten? Ernie replied matter-of-factly. Every time something strange happens, it's connected to Harry. He's a magnet for disaster. Even Seamus nodded. Harry felt awful. Why did they keep treating him like the calamity magnet? Hermione's face changed too. If Trelawney had said it, she might have shrugged, but coming from a friend, it felt weightier. Trying to comfort Lavender, Hermione said, These are probably coincidences. You always said you were afraid a fox would bite your rabbit, didn't you? Lavender, teetering on the edge of tears, shook her head. No, this time I was afraid it would die. Is the rabbit old? Hermione asked. No, it was a baby, Lavender said. Hermione fell silent. That only made the prophecy seem stranger. Even Harry wondered if the ominous black dog vision he'd seen might tie into this. While Gryffindor fretted, Slytherin was in high spirits. Many young witches and wizards longed for Hogsmeade, and Malfoy wouldn't miss the chance to talk, again, about his parents' love story in Hogsmeade. When the bell rang, Professor Snape announced that permission forms for Hogsmeade visits were due to him before Halloween. Daphne approached John, no longer angry, and asked, "John, are you going to Hogsmeade?" "I should be," he replied. A little girl stood with Daphne. John looked at her and asked, "Who's this?" Daphne beamed. "This is my sister, Astoria. She's a first-year Slytherin." Astoria, in her Slytherin robes, already had a pretty face and golden hair like Daphne's, but she looked quieter, more well-behaved. She blinked at John with curious eyes. "You're John Wick, aren't you? Daphne talks about you a lot," she said. Daphne's face went flustered. She slapped a hand over Astoria's mouth and hurried her away, mortified at what her sister might blurt out. John gave Daphne a look. Whatever Daphne had been saying about him at home made him resolve to finish the Chamber of Secrets quickly. Malfoy drifted over, curious. "Who was the little girl?" John shrugged. "Daphne's sister. By the way, give me back the badge." "I only looked twice," Malfoy protested, clutching the badge to his chest. He seemed chagrined at how easily John had called him out. "You're not serious, are you?" John rolled his eyes. "I'm afraid you'll lose it in Hogsmeade. I'll keep it safe for you." "All right," Malfoy grumbled, half persuaded. John slipped the badge away. He still needed to add a function to it so it would grant entry to the Constellation Society. In plain terms, a system upgrade. Heinrich arrived then, a nasty sore marring his pale, handsome face. "Did you fight with the Weasley twins again?" John asked. He reached out and brushed the sore lightly. It shrank and vanished. A cool expression crossed Heinrich's face, surprise and a new hardness in his eyes. "I'll make them suffer for this sooner or later," he said, voice grim. John raised an eyebrow and thought the twins would have to look out for themselves. Chapter 125, Establishment of the Constellation Society and a Makeshift Crew. Time flew. John was pleased with the star-filled dome he'd created. The initial Constellation Society Chamber of Secrets was nearly finished. Magic made it possible. What would have taken a Muggle months or a year took far less time with enchantments. "Adding the magic is the key," he muttered as he carefully carved the magical circuits. He used magic crystals as a power source, embedding 36 of them into the chamber like tiny constellations in the night sky. With those 36 crystals in place, no one short of Dumbledore or Voldemort could approach the chamber. The circuits weren't ordinary charms, but rituals built from ancient magic and runes John had researched. As he completed the last incantations, the entire Chamber of Secrets glowed with deep magical light. The circuits on the ceiling lit in sequence, and runes floated inside the space like spirits. The room was ornate. Beneath the starry dome sat a round table with 9 chairs. Violet tapestries and silver artifacts lined the walls, and the dome projected the position of each badge. Floating objects like tiny galaxies revolved slowly in the air. Mission accomplished. John had finished the Constellation Society Chamber of Secrets. Now he had to hide it somewhere. "I remember the room where the Philosopher's Stone was kept is vacant," he said. "Perfect." He installed a teleportation mechanism formed by the circuits. The wooden door outside looked ordinary, but it now led to 2 spaces, the original room and the Constellation Society chamber. He placed the chamber within the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets so he wouldn't have to enter through the girls' lavatory. 2 problems solved with 1 clever placement. On the day the chamber was complete, John gathered his chosen recruits. Cedric came, which pleased him. Cedric was curious about the club. "I've heard a lot about you, John," Cedric said with a smile. He'd seen John's dueling skill and respected it. "What do you need me for?" Malfoy showed up without his usual cronies for once, looking pleased to be involved after a semester of torment. Heinrich stood in the shadows. Neville seemed uncomfortable, wondering if it was wrong for him to be there. Percy frowned, trying to gauge John's intentions. Daphne had been invited too. She was studious and shared a competitive streak with Hermione. Including John, there were 7 of them present. The makeshift crew of the Constellation Society. John placed his right hand over the badge on his chest and smiled lightly. "Welcome, everyone, to the Constellation Society." The name made Malfoy glow with excitement. After a difficult term, he finally qualified for something exclusive. John pushed open the door. A magnificent room with a starry dome revealed itself. Daphne covered her mouth, breathless. It was beautiful. Section 109, Percy found it strange. When had Hogwarts gained a place like this? John waved them all in. Inside the room, the ceiling glittered like a night sky. With a solemn expression, John announced, "The Constellation Society welcomes friends. We pursue glory and help one another. We are not family, but closer than family. We seek power, and we share power." His gaze swept the gathered students. "Constellation is eternal, unchanging through the ages. Are you willing to join the Constellation Society?" Heinrich stepped forward without hesitation, lowering his head with fierce pride. "Heinrich Edgar, I am willing to join." Daphne followed, graceful and composed. "Daphne Greengrass, I am willing to join." Draco Malfoy, not to be outdone, put his right hand over his chest and said earnestly, "Draco Malfoy, I am willing to join." Of the remaining three, two were Gryffindors and one a Hufflepuff. Percy finally understood John's intention, and a spark lit in his eyes. He stepped forward, the head boy badge he prized gleaming on his chest. He removed it, bowed like Malfoy, and declared, "Percy Weasley, I am willing to join." "I knew you wouldn't be that simple," Cedric muttered, then smiled and stepped up. "Cedric Diggory, I am willing to join." Only Neville remained. John turned to him without pressure and said quietly, "Neville, I won't force you." Neville hesitated, then came forward. Training had thinned his face and pushed him taller. Loud and steady, he proclaimed, "Neville Longbottom, I am willing to join." They all bowed their heads. John raised a hand and pointed up at the dome. 6 stars fell from the ceiling and became 6 radiant badges. Each badge seemed to contain a tiny starry sky and was set with purple crystals. John placed a badge on each member, completing the induction. Watching them, he thought to himself, "Finally, a step has been taken." Once these 6 grew into their potential, the Constellation Society might not rival the Order of the Phoenix in scale, but it would be a force that could shake the wizarding world. John tapped the table. 7 golden goblets appeared and flew to each of them. He picked one up, feeling a burst of heroic bravado, picturing oaths and blood bonds, the sort of dramatic gesture he had seen in old tales. He was about to guzzle it and smash the cup on the floor when Percy frowned. "Students aren't allowed to drink alcohol," he said. "Cough, cough, this is pumpkin juice," John lied, almost choking. "I couldn't get any alcohol at school. The house elves in the kitchen wouldn't give it to me." The tension broke. Laughter rippled through the group. The 7 clinked cups and drank. The Constellation Society was born in that quiet corner. If only Fleur had been there, the circle would have felt complete. Most clubs at Hogwarts had been arranged by professors. A club like this, founded by John himself, carried the ambitions and limits of its 7 members. After joining, Malfoy's walk grew more arrogant. He carried himself as if no one could touch him, and even his disdain for the Weasleys and Longbottom had softened. John had told them that once you joined the Constellation Society, no matter what had come before, blood, house, family, the society would be your nearest kin. Draco, who'd originally resisted associating with some of them, stopped arguing. "Percy is head boy. Don't let Neville's timid look fool you. He could beat you to a pulp," John told him bluntly. Malfoy had his doubts until Neville nearly split him open with a practiced sword. Strength had its language, and Malfoy had to listen. He'd thought he'd rank among the top 3, or at worst 5, but reality put him near the bottom. Even Daphne and Neville outclassed him, and so did Heinrich and the others. "Phew, I'm 7th, Malfoy sighed, relieved. John smirked. "What are you thinking? You're 8th. Malfoy froze. John revealed there was another member studying at Beauxbatons, which meant Malfoy ranked 8th instead of 7th. "Work harder, child," John said, patting Malfoy's shoulder in a way that suggested both encouragement and expectation. He didn't mention that he had almost been Malfoy's godfather. If Malfoy didn't improve, how could he boast of his prodigy? "Your training will be doubled. Once you can defeat Neville, you can stop training." John painted the big picture every leader needed to give. "I have great hopes for you." The words sent a jolt through Malfoy, as if he'd been given a shot of adrenaline, and unfortunately, almost everyone had heard them. He didn't know, however, that Percy had missed the detail John had mentioned about Barty Crouch looking for an assistant. John's mention of the opportunity had nearly made him burst with excitement. Chapter 126, Crookshanks and the Dog. A piercing shriek tore through the workshop. A thin, smoke-like layer that formed a Dementor's body was seized and ripped apart as if by a giant hand. John was completely focused. His wand moved like a scalpel, peeling away the Dementor in precise strokes. The crystal on the chain around his neck glowed faintly. He misjudged once, used a fraction too much force, and the third Dementor died. John wiped sweat from his brow, but did not relax. He still didn't understand why, though he controlled every wisp of magic so carefully, things weren't going as he expected. I can't read the Dementor's thoughts. I can only tell by the volume of its screams, he muttered. He removed his earplugs without expression. The boggart in the cabinet dared not make a sound and huddled in the back, as if pretending to be dead. John glanced at the new shelf of reagents. A bottle sat there containing a black, smoky substance, something he had painstakingly extracted from the creature. He thought of it as its blood. It had no solid form, only roiling black smoke trapped inside the vial. Nearby, glass containers held floating silver threads, small, delicate, and eerily luminous. They looked sacred and pure. John wondered, is this the soul the Dementor never fully consumed, or its own essence? After a moment, he fitted gloves and used his wand to pluck a silver thread free. It resembled what he had seen before in another creature, like the strands taken from Nagini, but when he held it, there was no immediate summons like the last time. A wild idea struck him. "Soul, come back," he whispered. He pointed his wand toward his own temple. The silver thread slipped through his ear into his head. Everything changed. John lost control of his body. A vision unfolded as if a memory had been forced into him. A black-haired wizard with a cold, disdainful face standing over him like an ant. With a small flick of a wand, John felt his body utterly broken, bones pounded, skin stripped away inch by inch. He screamed without sound. In the vision, his tongue had been cut out, veins stood out around hollow eyes. He couldn't move, could not break free. All around him, other prisoners, people like him, howled silently. Resentment and suffering spread through John's mind until it filled the room. The torment went on, and horror flooded his eyes. Then everything vanished. John collapsed back into the Chamber of Secrets, gasping. The pain and the images had felt unbearably real. He checked the time. Half an hour had passed. Implanting a soul fragment into one's head was far too dangerous, he thought. He sat trembling, eyelids clamped shut until his pulse steadied. Fingerprints marked the table's edge where he had gripped it. The bruises on his hands showed how much torment he'd endured. "I'll find another method," he told himself. His fingers bled. He cast a quick charm to staunch it. Despite the trauma, there was an odd side effect. After a night's sleep, he felt sharper. He looked at a book and, without entering studious mode, read 10 lines at a glance. He had never processed information that quickly. Could the soul fragment have boosted his cognitive power? He wondered. It felt like something a dark wizard might do, and yet the effect was real. The boost lasted about an hour. If this could be turned into a drug, it would be the wizarding world's stimulant, he murmured, both fascinated and repelled. Leaving the classroom, John still felt a strange nostalgia for that heightened clarity. On the eve of Halloween, the Slytherin common room rang with laughter. Daphne reluctantly said goodbye to her sister Astoria. Malfoy and his cronies swore they'd be out drinking. As John handed his Hogsmeade permission slip to Filch, he saw Harry pleading with Professor McGonagall. "Please, Professor McGonagall, my aunt and uncle just forgot to sign it," Harry said desperately. McGonagall's face was all business. "I'm afraid not, Potter. No form, no Hogsmeade. I said that already." In truth, McGonagall did not want Harry to go. The students didn't know, but she did. Sirius Black was out there looking for Harry. Hogsmeade was an all-wizard village, and Sirius was dangerous enough to level a street with a spell. She refused to relent. Harry left crestfallen. John raised an eyebrow. Had his words to the Dursleys last time meant nothing to them? Clearly, good advice was wasted on those determined to ignore it. If Harry ever turned dark, John thought, the Dursleys would be the first to suffer. Chapter 110. Seeing Harry's disappointment, Hermione and Ron hurried over to comfort him. "Isn't there still the feast?" Ron tried to cheer him. "You know, the Halloween Eve feast is tonight." In the past, Harry might have looked forward to that, but compared to spending a whole day out playing with his friends, the feast felt dull. The Dursleys had genuinely forgotten. Harry hadn't contacted them after he left, and he had stormed out expecting them to sign, so he never got their permission. His face fell. John came up and patted his shoulder. "It's okay," he said. "It's mostly prank items and sweets. You can have butterbeer later." John's attempt at consolation only made Harry's disappointment worse. Hermione muttered, "Who comforts someone like that?" John didn't think he'd said anything odd. He patted Harry's shoulder again and started to leave. Outside, a dog leading a cat passed by, an odd sight that made Ron reflexively check his pocket, then remember he hadn't brought Scabbers and breathe easier. Hermione called, "Crookshanks!" Crookshanks stopped, turned toward her, a paper bag of dried fish still in his mouth. Tom, the dog, carried a bundle of dog food in his jaws, a variety of bags, as if the two were off to visit relatives. "It was the right choice to let Tom take Crookshanks," Hermione said with a smile. Having a dog and a cat wandering the castle surprisingly improved Ron and Hermione's moods. Tom was the undisputed pet ruler at Hogwarts, and Crookshanks was clever. Together the pair were curiously well matched. Ron and Hermione promised Harry they'd bring back gifts, then hurried after the others, heading to Hogsmeade. Harry watched them go, alone and dejected. Filch narrowed his eyes as he watched Harry. He seemed worried Harry might run off. Madame Norris mewed, and Filch slipped a dried fish from his pocket for her. The dog and the cat ran from the castle toward the humping willow. Without Tom needing to display any of his usual showy moves against Malfoy, Crookshanks reached out, pressed a knot in the willow, and the tree immediately stilled. Tom scurried into the secret passage beneath, Crookshanks close behind. Sirius, holed up in the shrieking shack, had almost recovered. He'd been spotted by Muggles on his way to Hogwarts and chased by Aurors, taken a few hits, but had escaped by turning into his animagus form, a large black dog. When he saw the approaching cat and dog, he grinned. These two were old acquaintances and more than willing to help. If he knew Tom was actually carrying dog food for others, Sirius would probably scold him for being soft-hearted. "Woof," Tom said. "Meow," Crookshanks replied. They might not have spoken in any human language, but their message was clear. Sirius was going to act. He intended to find that blasted rat and end it. Leading the way wouldn't be a problem. Sirius knew the way back to Hogwarts. He'd gone there before. Chapter 127, Forbidden Magic and Stripped Souls. Hogsmeade, the only all-wizarding village in the country, was buzzing. John wandered into Honeyduke's, the candy shop everyone loved. Even adult wizards came for the sweets. When he picked up a cockroach cluster and popped it in his mouth, he could almost feel it wriggling. It was overwhelmingly sweet, like a mouthful of syrup. "Boss, give me a few of these," he told the shopkeeper, crushing and swallowing the candy without changing his expression. He spent 10 galleons and filled his satchel with a large haul. Hogsmeade wasn't large. John wandered the streets and even caught Hagrid hurrying out for a drink. He followed him into the Three Broomsticks and ordered butterbeer. It was good, he thought, better chilled, but cold butterbeer was too cloying. "Hagrid?" John called when the gamekeeper noticed him. Hagrid waved John over, then lowered his voice. "You know, Sirius is near Hogwarts." Hagrid's face betrayed hesitation. If it weren't John, he might not have spoken so freely. He leaned in, voice hushed, and stumbled over his words. "That fellow, he's after Harry. You don't know. He used to." He stopped, struggling. John held up a calming hand. "You don't have to force it out, Hagrid. You're asking for my help, aren't you?" Hagrid swallowed and nodded. John folded his hands out of habit. He hadn't brought the Ring of Spells, otherwise he might have played the role of a proper wizard godfather, and regarded Hagrid with a steady look that made the giant sit up straighter. Hagrid found the courage to say, "John, I know you're powerful, the most brilliant student I've seen. Sirius will look for Harry." Hagrid faltered, ashamed. He betrayed James, betrayed his best friend, and he's Harry's godfather. I can't imagine what Harry would feel knowing that. John understood without needing the rest. If Harry learned the truth, he might rush out to kill Sirius. No wonder the Weasleys fretted about Harry acting on impulse. Hagrid finished a beer in a miserable gulp and begged, "John, promise me. Stop him." Hagrid was simple but devoted to Harry like a clumsy, overprotective father. John answered, I'll watch out for him. But understand, Harry isn't a puppy I can keep tied up. I can't stop him from leaving if he decides to go." Hagrid brightened at that, grateful. Another butterbeer, my treat. After that second beer, John left. Hogsmeade bored him more than he expected. His real reason for coming wasn't the sweets. He pulled on a mask, wrapped a cloak tight, and slipped into the Hog's Head. The place lived up to its name. Pig heads hung over the bar, bristling with saliva at their tusks. The Hog's Head smelled of smoke and secrets. Shady figures made quiet deals in the corners. John sat alone, hood up and face hidden. A figure in a white mask took the chair opposite him. "My lord," the masked person said. John's voice was low. "Where's what I asked for?" "It was found with an old witch in Knockturn Alley. We dealt with her there. She was using children as test subjects." The masked figure slid a silver, carved box across the table. John took the box, confirmed its contents, and nodded. "Go. Tell me anything you learn about the shop. There shouldn't be any movement from the ministry, right?" Tang Mi inclined his head. "No. The ministry currently has a good impression of us. Cornelius Fudge wanted to visit you once, but I said you were out." John shook his head. "Fudge isn't a competent minister. Dumbledore's patience with him is wearing thin. We'll wait and act when the time's right." "Yes." Tang Mi left, and John examined the book more closely. It couldn't be thrown into a satchel like an ordinary volume. The ancient text was sealed in its silver box. It demanded careful handling. He had seen a record of it once, in the Chamber of Secrets. It should have been there, yet somehow it had ended up in Knockturn Alley, perhaps during the time Voldemort lingered in that quarter. John, cultivating a certain outlaw reputation, had cleared out wizards who preyed on children in Knockturn Alley and come across the book. The volume dealt with forbidden magic, research on souls, methods of separating them. John didn't linger. He apparated away to a secluded spot. Daphne had been searching for him. She had just caught sight of him, but by the time she turned, he was gone. Back at Hogwarts, John hurried straight to the Chamber of Secrets. Filch blinked in surprise at his sudden return. Chapter 11. John found the Chamber of Secrets easily enough. He opened the exquisitely carved silver box and found, nestled inside, a book bound in unfamiliar red leather. The moment his fingers brushed the cover, a scream ripped through his head, sharp, wrenching, like the keening of a dementor. John gritted his teeth and forced the sound back with occlumency. A thought flickered through his mind, a spell that strikes the soul. When the noise faded, the pallor returned to his face. He opened the book. The pages were filled with a flowing, elegant hand. John read in silence, surprise shading his features from time to time. He closed it and let the new knowledge settle, then put the book back into the box and set out to capture Dementors. Catching 3 of them was painfully simple. John began the experiment at once. He muttered under his breath, methodical and careful. Curses to curses, souls to souls, thread by thread, with utmost care. For hours he held his posture, wary and precise. Slowly the Dementor decomposed, its formless essence congealed, and 3 hours later something incredible stood before him. From the wavering darkness he drew out what looked like a human form, glowing faintly silver white. Within it, black and white swirled, then separated cleanly, opposite colors pulling apart like oil and milk. "It worked," he breathed. The luminous figure collapsed into a small ball. With a quick flick of his wand, John separated the black and the white parts. He watched, hardly able to hide his satisfaction, as the last sliver of soul slid into a glass bottle. The Dementor was not killed, only unmade, stripped, rearranged. John's mouth twisted. The operation had been brutal. He packed the bottled fragment away, feeling both triumph and a sourness in his chest. "What a cruel process," he murmured. Fortunately, there were more Dementors to be had. He set about collecting a few more for spare materials and experiments. Harry returned to the Gryffindor common room with a knot of questions buzzing behind his ears. Colin had been insistent, and Harry had ducked out rather than try to explain why he hadn't been allowed outside without a permission slip. Soon after, Professor Lupin, pale and looking drawn, met him and invited him into his office. Lupin offered tea with a weary smile. Harry only half listened, distracted. They talked about the first Defense Against the Dark Arts class. Harry asked why Lupin hadn't let him face the boggart. Lupin's answer was immediate. He'd thought the boggart would choose Lord Voldemort as its form, and he didn't want Voldemort's image frightening other students. Harry explained that at first he had thought of Voldemort too, but the figure had shifted into a Dementor. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock. Snape stood in the doorway with a black-brown vial of wolfsbane potion. Harry watched Lupin's face tightens. The potion was clearly harsh to drink. Lupin explained, almost apologetically, that he'd once brewed up a stock while working at Silverhand Johnny's shop, but had given bottles away to ease the suffering of werewolves in his community. He'd saved only a little and had had to ask Dumbledore to get Snape to brew more. Harry flinched as Lupin took a sip. He half expected him to convulse, but Lupin only grimaced and steadied himself. "Well, I'll go look for John," Harry said after a moment. Seeing Lupin in pain made him want to leave. Lupin's gaze lingered on Harry. When Harry mentioned John, Lupin's interest sharpened. "John Wick? Didn't he go to Hogsmeade?" he asked. "I saw him come back, but I don't know where he went, Professor." Harry looked toward the window, still uncertain where John had gone. Lupin's hand hovered in the air for a second before he patted Harry's shoulder rather than his head. For a moment his face softened. In Harry's eyes, Lupin saw something. His late wife's eyes, Lily's bright, familiar look, and memories rushed in. Lupin's expression clouded. The years with the Marauders flared up, 2 of the 4 gone, 1 turned traitor, only he left to remember them. He sighed, the old sorrow returning with the mention of Sirius and James. As he clutched his fist, a strange crimson touch crossed his pale cheek, a flicker of emotion that did not suit his tired face. He forced himself to smile when Harry left. At the evening feast, the rumor spread like wildfire. Sirius Black had been seen. The whole school was told to assemble in the great hall. John, who had been up most of the night working on his experiment, felt the pull of sleep but kept his manner careless, as if he had known the news already. The portrait of the fat lady had been slashed. Black had tried to get in and, failing, attacked it. Professors fanned out to search the castle, while Percy organized the students. Sleeping bags were conjured and passed around. John slipped into one in a corner, hunkered down, and let his eyes close. 2 hours of rest, and he would be himself again. Nearby, the 3 Gryffindors whispered, "Do you think Black is still in the castle?" Hermione fretted. "Dumbledore seems to think so," Ron replied, exhausted. "If he's been on the run, he's probably lost all sense of time," said Ron, and the quiet drifted over them. Harry's mind, however, had begun to turn over possibilities. Someone had helped Black get into the school. No one could explain some of the entry theories. Transfiguration, clinging to the roof of the train. Opening a door from the inside was easier than prying it from the outside. It was a thought he couldn't shake as drowsiness crept in. After he'd closed his eyes a little while, the hall's big doors creaked open. Dumbledore came in, followed by Snape and Percy, and the murmuring hush fell to silence. Chapter 112. Snape's words made Harry prick up his ears. "Have you considered how he got in, Professor?" Snape asked suddenly. "Many theories, Severus, but none of them hold up," Dumbledore replied, casting a warning look at Snape. Snape leaned in and spoke in a low voice. "Do you remember our conversation, Headmaster, just before term started?" "I do, Severus," Dumbledore said, his tone sharpened. "It seems impossible that Black could have broken into the school without inside help." Snape let the words hang. "I expressed my concerns when you—" "I do not believe there is anyone in this castle who would help Black," Dumbledore cut him off, closing the discussion. He rose then. "I must go down and find those Dementors. I told them we would let them search after we finished our sweep." Gathering the students was necessary, not only to guard against Sirius Black, but to protect them from encountering Dementors. Several Dementors had gone missing lately. The Ministry and the guards themselves were eager to search the grounds. If possible, Dumbledore did not want them to enter Hogwarts. The trio had lost sleep over the news. John, however, was still fast asleep. A little later, the Dementors entered the castle. The chill they brought was suffocating. It made the younger students restless and afraid even in their sleep. 2 hours later, John's eyes flew open. "Tom isn't back," he said at once. The first thing John thought of on waking was that his dog wasn't in the dormitory. He glanced at the trio beside him. They hadn't noticed he was awake. Placing his palm on the floor, John silently wove the super sense spell. An invisible wave radiated out from him. He could now extend its range over 300 meters. "The Dementors came in," he muttered, not expecting Dumbledore to allow them inside. As long as they didn't come into direct contact with animals, the creatures would be unharmed. Dementors preyed on coherent human souls. Animals, like dogs, were usually ignored. Tom shouldn't have wandered past their perimeter. John felt well-rested and full of energy. Normally, he would be in the lab now, but he couldn't leave. "Fine, I'll read." He always carried a small bag. He pulled out a transfiguration book and began to read by the dim light. He could see in the dark without bothering to light a lamp. The trio's murmured discussion finally tapered off. Harry, glancing over, noticed John flipping pages, but couldn't see well enough to tell what he was reading. The night passed. The Dementors left after failing to find Sirius Black, and the whole school erupted in speculation again. Everyone argued about how Black had entered the castle. Hannah Abbott claimed she'd seen him turn into a flowering bush. The Gryffindor portrait had been temporarily replaced by Sir Cadogan, to the students' dismay. He kept changing the passwords to ridiculous phrases. When John returned from washing, he passed the girls' lavatory and saw Peeves tormenting Myrtle. Myrtle was wailing, and Peeves was cackling. John's expression shifted. He called out, "Peeves, come here for a moment." The poltergeist smile froze, and after a moment's sulk, he swooped over. "Esteemed John Wick, what can I do for you?" Peeves had his reasons to be wary. Myrtle had once shown off a hairpin to the ghosts, and Peeves, annoyed, had demanded one of his own. John had caught Peeves and used him in experiments with ghost spells, which made Peeves fear him more than even the Bloody Baron. John didn't care about the whispers Peeves might hurl under his breath. He feigned curiosity. "Fat lady was attacked. Do you know anything?" Peeves twisted himself into a ridiculous posture and grinned. "Of course I do. He was frightful, Sirius Black. Like a bear, I tell you." "Like a bear?" John raised an eyebrow. He had suspected as much. Dementors feed on coherent human souls and generally do not understand or target animals. That meant one possibility. Black might be an animagus, someone who can transform entirely into an animal while retaining human intelligence. Peeves's description fit. As Peeves started to flit away, John called after him, "What did you want from me last time?" Peeves's grin flickered. John shrugged. "You help me with something. I'll help you." "Oh, if you give me some dung bombs, I'll happily call you sir," Peeves crowed. "All right," John said promptly. "But not in class. Any other time is fine." "Of course, Mr. Wick," Peeves shrieked, delighted, and vanished. John shook his head and smiled despite himself, thinking of all the mischief Peeves would cause. He could get dung bombs from the Weasley twins, who had even set up an owl delivery service at Hogwarts. John wrote a note to Basil and expected the shipment by evening. Monday was busy as ever. That afternoon, in Care of Magical Creatures, John saw Buckbeak again. Hagrid was fussing. His restless heart seemed to be bothering him. John told Hagrid he needed leave. "Professor Hagrid, I need to take leave today. I can't help with the class." Hagrid looked surprised. "You taken leave? Feeling ill?" "No, just personal matters," John said. The truth was that he wanted to begin animagus preparations. He was already at level 4 transfiguration and needed a long, careful process that stretched from one full moon to the next. During that month, he wouldn't be able to speak. He'd need to hold a mandrake leaf in his mouth the entire time. He had to gather materials. Hagrid did not refuse a request like that. And after 2 months of teaching, he felt confident he could manage the class without John. As they finished, a boy came up to Buckbeak and got more than he expected. The hippogriff lashed out and knocked him clean over. Screams followed, and Hagrid hurried the injured student to the hospital wing, putting the lesson to an abrupt end. John obtained mandrake leaves from Professor Sprout. By the weather patterns he'd watched, the full moon would be in about a week, perfect timing to start. He still needed other rare items, like the chrysalis of a death's head hawkmoth for the second full moon. Once the materials were gathered, it would be a matter of waiting for the right storm. Only when lightning cracked across the sky during a thunderstorm could he truly begin the final ritual. "So troublesome," John muttered to himself. "No wonder so few people ever become animagi." The steps were tedious and exacting. Success required talent, endurance, and a generous measure of luck. One misstep could undo months of work. An experienced animagus to guide him would help. Professor McGonagall came to mind, but John did not want her involved. His transformation would be unusual. Animagi cannot become magical creatures. That was a strict rule. But because he had drunk magic blood, his form might be different, possibly something McGonagall would find shocking. The fewer people who knew, the better. Chapter 130. Snape's Hint and the Soul-Eating Curse. Money isn't everything, but most things that move people are about money. Even in the magical world, that principle still held. John had quickly gathered the necessary materials, a delicate box containing mandrake leaves. When the next full moon came, he could begin his animagus transformation. Speaking of which, Lupin will transform during the full moon, someone muttered, and John remembered Lupin's condition. With the Wolfsbane potion now available, Lupin probably wouldn't show up to class in his werewolf form. Sure enough, Professor Snape was standing at the front of Defense Against the Dark Arts instead of Lupin. "Sorry I'm late, Professor Lupin. Harry started as he entered, only to be cut off. "This class started 10 minutes ago, Potter. 10 points from Gryffindor. Sit down." Snape glanced up from the podium. His tone was flat, laced with scorn. Harry halted in the doorway, confusion and irritation warring on his face. "Where's Professor Lupin?" "He said he's feeling very unwell and couldn't come to class today," Snape said with a sneer, as if savoring the news. He fixed Harry with a cold stare. "I believe I ordered you to sit, did I not?" Harry thought of several things at once. Snape's long-standing covetousness over the position of Defense Against the Dark Arts, the odd, murky potion Snape had forced Lupin to drink. It looked almost like poison. He held his ground. "What happened to him?" he demanded. Snape's patience thinned. "No life-threatening danger," he said, but his face betrayed a thin hope that it might be worse. "Gryffindor, another 5 points. If I have to tell you a third time, I'll take 50. Harry sank into his seat. John watched the exchange with interest. Snape appeared angry on the surface, but he answered every one of Harry's questions. He scanned the class with a frosty expression. "Before Potter interrupted me, I was discussing what you have already learned. Professor Lupin left no lesson records." "We covered boggarts, red caps, kappas, and grindylows," Hermione chimed in quickly, rattling off the previous lessons. "We were just about to start." "Quiet, I didn't ask you," Snape cut her off. Hermione's thorough recitation only made Snape colder. "I am criticizing Professor Lupin's disorganized teaching," he said with thin-lipped displeasure. "He did teach us." Hermione began again, but Snape's disdain silenced her. Dean Thomas opened his mouth to back her up, but Snape's glare froze him. John could only stare. Snape's face had already darkened. Sensing the class starting to murmur, John cleared his throat. The room fell quieter by degrees. John looked up at Snape and smiled. "Please continue, Professor." Snape studied John for a long moment, then flicked his wand. "Today we will be discussing werewolves." He dragged out the last word. Hermione tried to speak, but Snape had already turned toward John. "Mr. Wick, perhaps you can explain." Snape had even opened the textbook to page 394, the chapter on werewolves. Crossing his arms, he asked lazily, "How do you distinguish a werewolf from a true wolf?" Calling on John so directly was unusual. With Lupin absent, and Lupin himself a werewolf, the question carried an edge. John didn't want to miss the opportunity for points. "Werewolves differ from true wolves in a few ways," he said. "Their pupils, the shape of their noses, the presence or absence of a tail." He answered smoothly, and Snape rewarded him with 10 points. Snape then fired more and more questions at John. Each one answered in turn. Hermione sat with her hand raised the whole time, ignored. Ron scowled. "You ask so many questions of him," Ron muttered loudly. "She knows the answers. If you're going to only ask John, why not just give him 50 points? Snape turned like a snake. He stalked over to Ron and leaned in close, his face inches from the boys. The rest of the class held its breath. Ron's bravado wavered. Snape's voice dropped to a silky whisper. "Detention, Weasley." He straightened and looked around the room. Everyone shrank back. None dared speak again. The whole period felt like a performance for John, Snape grilling him as if trying to coax out Lupin's secret. John suppressed the urge to rub his forehead. He already knew Lupin's condition. He didn't need Snape's heavy-handed hints. Still, he answered the questions as they came. When the Q&A ended, it was time to copy notes. Snape placed a fresh sheet of parchment in front of John. John glanced at the page he had just finished and frowned. "John Wick, your handwriting is atrocious. Rewrite it." Snape said it slowly, deliberately. John's mouth twitched. His cursive wasn't bad. He resented the insinuation. But he had no choice and copied it again. The bell finally rang. Class was dismissed. Snape's wand lay casually across the open textbook, the tip resting on the word werewolf. "Each of you will write an essay on how to identify and kill werewolves," Snape intoned. 2 rolls of parchment. He paused, then leaned down and spoke to John, enunciating each word. "John Wick, you must submit 4 rolls." John almost said out loud, "I know, stop dropping hints." But Snape didn't notice his irritation. "Hand them in Monday morning. This class needs proper management. Weasley, do not leave." Ron, still furious about being ignored and then saddled with extra punishment, pleaded with Harry and Hermione for help. They offered only sympathetic looks. Ron's detention was to scrub the hospital wing bedpans, no magic allowed. He swore, loudly, that he'd send Sirius to hide in Snape's office and do worse things. That evening, John looked up at the sky. Tomorrow was the full moon. He made his way to the Chamber of Secrets. Dementor hunting had so far failed to reveal the chamber. The new Dementor was pressed into a corner, its tattered cloak fluttering. John drew his wand and cast a Patronus. It took the form of an albatross and pinned the Dementor in place. 2 vials sat on the floor in front of him, one containing a silver-white wisp, the soul, and the other a black mass. After a moment's hesitation, John picked up the black vial. If a Dementor had a physical aspect, this black mass was it, a concentrated curse woven from dust and rot. John placed his right hand over the black mass. It was absorbed, coalescing into a dense black sphere in his palm. Wisps of darkness unfurled like threads. John breathed toward the Dementor. The black strands, like spider silk, crept over the creature, unraveling and devouring its tattered cloak. John watched with narrowed eyes. "Is this cannibalism?" he wondered aloud. He took a ring from his pocket, an ornate band set with an emerald green gem, and held it out. The darkness flowed toward the ring, blackening the emerald surface with web-like streaks. "Soul-eating curse," he muttered, naming the thing as it embedded itself into the jewel. He slid the ring onto his right ring finger, clenched his fist, and aimed at the weakened Dementor. Layers of black stripped away and flew into the ring. The Dementor gave a high, keening scream as its physical curse was slowly torn away, leaving behind only an unconscious, empty soul. John stood over the silent husk and the faint, drifting wisp. It had worked, however unsettling the name felt. Chapter 131. Quidditch Match Accident and the Advancing Dementors. Saturday brought heavy rain. It felt as if the heavens were set against Gryffindor. Wood's face was grim as the wind whipped umbrellas nearly out of spectators' hands. The Slytherin team had pulled out of the day's match, claiming a teammate's injury. Of course, it was the new Slytherin Seeker who'd been knocked down by Buckbeak's claw. "Cowards," Wood spat. "They want to see Gryffindor and Hufflepuff suffer." Harry seethed, especially after Ron's recent punishment. They all peered out at the downpour. The rain fell like pellets, stinging the face. The gusts were strong enough to make brooms nearly uncontrollable. Harry went to change into his scarlet team robes. Outside the changing room, he spotted Malfoy, scowling as though someone had embezzled thousands of galleons from him. Goyle and Crabbe sheltered him under an umbrella. Malfoy looked downright sour. John stood nearby and cast a waterproofing charm on himself. Water beaded and slid off his robes. He did the same for Daphne at her request. "You're not in a good mood," she observed. John glanced at Malfoy and instantly understood why the boy was so irritable. Chapter 114. After Malfoy sat down, he spat, "They think I'll lose to Potter." He'd sworn he would avenge the humiliation, but Flint, the captain, had refused the match, claiming injured players. Malfoy felt insulted. He'd done all the preparations, and they still doubted him. He wanted a fight with Harry more than anything. John replied coldly, "When you're captain, you'll be able to decide everything." Malfoy only scowled. If Potter heard about this, he'd think Malfoy a poor sport. The match was about to begin in a blur of red and yellow under the rain, but John only laughed. "If we can't play, at least we can cheer for our friends." Cedric Diggory, Both captain and seeker for Hufflepuff wasn't deterred by the downpour. He smiled at Wood. This will be a fine match. Wood shook his hand. Cedric's easy manner made even his rivals warm to him. At the whistle, the game began. Harry shot into the sky, Cedric close behind. They were like predators in the air, searching keenly for the golden snitch. Bludgers flew wildly. Harry was almost knocked off his broom several times. The rain smeared his lenses until even people were hazy, let alone a walnut-sized golden snitch. The match dragged on and on. Harry barely managed to avoid collisions with teammates and opponents. Lightning cracked across the sky and Madame Hooch blew her whistle. Timeout. Harry took the break to get his bearings. Wood's aggressive tactics had earned them a 50-point lead, but in this weather, the game could run until midnight if the snitch wasn't caught. Harry wiped his glasses, but within seconds they fogged again. He said, despairing, "With these glasses, I've got no chance." Just then, Hermione appeared. She tapped his glasses with her wand. "Impervious," she said. "There, waterproof now." She handed them back. Wood watched, briefly tempted to kiss her, but common sense stopped him. Though they would still be pelted by rain and frozen in the air, at least Harry could see. He pushed his broom into the wind, searching for the snitch. A bludger almost took his head. He ducked under Cedric with a deft move. Lightning forked across the sky. The storm worsened. Harry needed the snitch fast and turned for a better vantage point. Another flash lit the stands like daylight. John shaded his eyes and looked up. Daphne followed his gaze. "What is it?" she asked. "Something up there," John said. Harry saw it too, a shaggy black shape silhouetted against the storm, sitting in an empty top row of the stands like a huge black dog. He slipped for a breath on his broom and dropped a few feet. When he flung the fringe of rain from his eyes, the black dog was gone. "Harry, behind you!" Wood shouted. Harry turned. The golden snitch glinted, being chased by Cedric. If Cedric caught it, they'd lose. Harry accelerated, ignoring the vanished dog. "Faster! Faster!" he urged himself, though it didn't make his broom any quicker. Then came the cold that had terrified him once before, the cold that drained the breath. 100 Dementors poured over the edge of the stands and swarmed the pitch like a moving shadow. John, finally seeing clearly what hung over the stadium, went white with anger. "If the Ministry can't control them, I'll make them," he growled. He stood and drew his wand. "Expecto Patronum!" Professors reacted as well. By the time they did, the Dementors had reached the edge of the pitch. Professor Flitwick sent a silvery light into the air, an albatross-shaped Patronus cutting through the gloom. Wherever it passed, Dementors faltered and fled. Flitwick cried out, delighted, "A splendid Patronus!" John didn't stop at wand work alone. He raised his right hand. The rain within 100 meters swirled toward him, gathering in a spinning mass. A 10-meter water sphere condensed in his palm. Eyes in the stands widened. John plunged his wand into that globe and shouted, "Expecto Patronum!" The albatross Patronus dove into the water globe. The sphere reshaped, like an egg hatching, water feathered and glowed until a gigantic, luminous albatross rose from it. The creature swept across the pitch, and wherever it passed, the Dementors were swallowed into its vast belly, unable to resist. It seemed to feed, corralling and devouring the intruders until it landed and collapsed back into a water sphere. Of the 100 Dementors, more than 20 had been consumed. Flitwick, clapping until his hands reddened, could barely contain his enthusiasm. An extraordinary combining of the Patronus charm with the water prison charm. If this were at our practicals, I'd award 100 points. The pitch erupted into cheers. John smiled and bowed to Flitwick's praise, though the exertion left him drained. His magic crystal had been bleeding power the whole time. Every great spell sapped it a little more. He smiled, then his face tightened. He'd forgotten something. A figure was plummeting from the sky, too fast, and John was too late to reach him. "Arresto momentum!" boomed a voice. Harry's fall stopped midair. Dumbledore stood below, hand extended, wandless casting, and the old man's calm efficiency arrested Harry's momentum. John looked to Dumbledore with respect and a quick bow. Dumbledore's eyes brightened when he saw the water prison Patronus. The spell variation was unusual and brilliant. Even Dumbledore had to admit the ingenuity on display. Even Lord Voldemort could not have matched John's command in his 3rd year, but Harry had fainted regardless. The match ended with Hufflepuff's victory. Cedric, hearing that Harry had passed out, looked uncomfortable and immediately offered a rematch, a gracious gesture that warmed the whole crowd. If Wood had been less stony, he might have rushed to thank Cedric in person. Harry was carried to the hospital wing. The danger, however, was not over yet. Dumbledore's face was grave as he stared at the Dementors trapped inside the water prison Patronus. The White Wizard's anger was obvious. Had the Dementors been allowed free rein in the stadium, the disaster would have been terrible. "I need to find Cornelius Fudge, John," Dumbledore said quietly. "Please keep these Dementors under control." John nodded. A few bolder students stood up, wanting to help, but he motioned them back. Managing the water prison required concentration and power. He used his wand to shift the water sphere to a safer place while Professors Flitwick and McGonagall stepped forward to assist. Their faces showed the same mixture of fear and outrage. Releasing Dementors where students might be harmed was a recklessness neither of them would forgive. "I shall be making a formal complaint," McGonagall said, voice cold. "Mr. Wick, thank you for your timely assistance." Flitwick, still buzzing from excitement, added, "Simply brilliant, Mr. Purr." Wick, combining the Patronus with a water prison. Inspired. "We need somewhere to put them," Flitwick muttered, as a practical charms master. "I don't know how far we can move this." John felt the strain in his hand. The crystal that powered his spells was dwindling. The device was not infinite. Restoring or replacing those materials would be costly. They decided to move the water sphere down into one of the castle's dungeons, not the Slytherin cellars, but deeper, away from students. The Dementors fought, tried to escape, but the three of them, John, McGonagall, and Flitwick, kept them contained and sent them below. Afterwards, John's right hand throbbed. He glanced at the ring on that finger. The black filigree along the band was more pronounced now. During the struggle with the Dementors, he had absorbed a great deal of their influence. He discreetly withdrew the thin black threads that connected the ring to the water prison. The Dementors looked listless and disoriented. McGonagall assumed it was the Patronus's suppression that left them weakened. By evening, a delegation from the Ministry of Magic arrived, led by Minister Cornelius Fudge. Another familiar face arrived. Rufus Scrimgeour, head of the Auror office. People rushed over, and John could see that Minister Fudge's face had gone pale. He kept nervously dabbing at his brow with a handkerchief. He was terrified. Dementors at Hogwarts, at a school backed by the old wizarding families of Britain, was a scandal that could unite every influential household against him. He had fought hard to keep his power, and the thought of losing it made him jittery. Fudge bolted for the headmaster's office, and John received a summons to follow. Inside, he found Dumbledore looking angrier and more serious than John had ever seen him. When Fudge saw John, his eyes lit up, and moving far quicker than his rotund form suggested, he seized John's hand and pumped it enthusiastically. "You're John Wick, the one who drove off the Dementors?" Fudge breathed. Thank you, thank you. You prevented a tragedy and, frankly, saved the Ministry's reputation. The Ministry will not forget this. If you'd accept, I can arrange an invitation after you graduate. The Ministry needs talents like you." He smiled so broadly sweat beaded at his upper lip. All the while he kept sneaking glances at Dumbledore. It was clear his real aim was to court the headmaster, not just John. Rufus Scrimgeour's face remained composed. He made no move to join Fudge's flattery. John met Dumbledore's gaze and could see the disappointment there. Fudge had shirked responsibility. Dumbledore's disapproval was not hard to understand. "I'm sorry, Minister, but Headmaster Dumbledore wishes to speak with me," John said with a polite, measured smile and slipped free of Fudge's grip. Dumbledore's expression eased when he looked at John. "John, I need you to tell me exactly what happened," he said. John calmly described everything, the Dementors' sudden surge onto the Quidditch pitch and how he had managed to repel them. He spoke as if recounting a simple event, not a terrifying threat. Fudge's face grew darker with each sentence. John added, without anger but with clear intent, "I think the Dementors failed to suppress their instinct precisely because of the joyful atmosphere of Quidditch. Leaving the safety of the students to creatures like Dementors was like leaving fish to a greedy cat." Dumbledore inclined his head toward Fudge, and with a tone that was practically a rebuke, made the minister feel every inch of his displeasure. The meeting broke up with no small amount of ill will on both sides. John watched it all with a sharp light in his eyes. Fudge had been incompetent for too long. His mishandling since Voldemort's return had become a liability. An opening had presented itself. Over the next hours, John wrote over a dozen letters and sent them to pureblood leaders and other influential figures. If they acted together, they could make serious trouble for a minister under fire. With Fudge's blunder as fuel, the case practically made itself. The next day, the Dementors were taken away. There were over 20 of them. Several seemed unusually sluggish, and a few were even wearing coats a size too tight. Rufus Scrimgeour officially turned them over to Professor McGonagall and promised they would be punished. He sounded confident in part because Mr. Johnny Silverhand had offered his assistance. Later that night, after Scrimgeour and Fudge left Hogwarts, John watched as Fudge was hurriedly summoned back to the Ministry. Shortly after, sounds of furious smashing and breaking echoed from the minister's office. Apparently, Johnny Silverhand had made his displeasure known. John smiled inwardly. He had long been irritated by Fudge's rule. Who, after all, wanted to be kept down when they could stand on their own? Harry, meanwhile, had not yet woken. He had fallen at least 50 feet and remained unconscious for some time. After the storm cleared that evening, the sky was calm, and a full moon shone like a pale disk overhead. Perfect timing. John took a mandrake leaf and tucked it into his mouth. He was ready to begin the next step, his animagus training. He could not speak properly. The previous exertion had left his throat raw, so he had prepared another way to communicate. With his wand, he traced patterns in the air. Red sparks clung to the lines and formed a glowing mark wherever he passed. He planned to use this to leave messages. If anyone asked, he could claim his voice was hoarse from overusing magic the day before. People in the wizarding world had all kinds of odd ailments, and it was a plausible explanation. After the full moon, Harry finally came to. He was miserable. His Quidditch team had lost on his watch. This was especially crushing for Wood. It was his final year, and despite all his skill, he had never lifted the cup. Then, in a further blow, Harry's Nimbus 2000 had been blown into the Humping Willow and smashed beyond repair. 3 years of his life, gone. Visitors kept coming, bringing condolences and curious glances. John brought a box of cockroach clusters, something darkly humorous to lighten Harry's mood. Hermione eyed John in puzzled concern. He had not spoken a single word since the incident. John pointed to his throat and then used the glowing mark to write out the explanation he had prepared, that his voice was hoarse because he had saved Harry. Hearing that only increased Harry's guilt. Lupin returned after the full moon. He still looked a little tired, but he smiled, and the students cheered at the sight of their favorite Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. They griped loudly about Snape's behavior in his absence. Draco Malfoy, predictably, remained unconvinced. Snape, in his mind, was the superior professor. Lupin's return was also a moment of new appreciation for John. During a class, John demonstrated a silent casting technique, a method normally taught in 6th year, but John had already mastered it in 3rd. Lupin also noticed John's ring. The ring's style reminded Lupin of someone else he knew, Johnny Silverhand, but the color was different and John wore it on his right hand, not the left. Curious, Lupin found John after class. "When did you start wearing that ring?" he asked casually. John blinked, then wrote in the air with his wand, "A gift." Lupin accepted the simple explanation. Halloween had only just passed, but worry nagged at him. He remembered seeing John perform a powerful Patronus charm on the train. That fact made things stranger. Dark wizards could not usually produce Patronuses, and Lupin's memory of Johnny Silverhand painted him as ruthless and ambitious, not someone who would cast such a protective spell. Perhaps John wasn't a dark wizard, but a connection to Johnny Silverhand made Lupin uneasy. Maybe Sirius Black's escape had something to do with that circle of people. "I don't want you wrapped up with that man, John," Lupin said earnestly. Whether as teacher or as someone who cared, he meant it. Potions class remained an ordeal. John had already felt Professor Snape's cold stare 3 times that week. Snape's resentment was palpable enough to sour the air. Snape had been watching him since the Dementor incident, and John's hoarseness only made the potions master more annoyed. If Snape could prove Lupin dangerous, if he could reveal the teacher's lycanthropy, he could justify pushing Lupin out of Hogwarts and, in Snape's mind, root out suspected insiders connected to Sirius. But those plans were more troublesome in practice than he had thought. Still, under Snape's watchful resentment, John made it through the lesson. Daphne grew anxious. John's appetite had shrunk from his usual 3 bowls of stew to only half a bowl, and he stuck to soft, mushy foods. He was afraid of swallowing the mandrake leaf he had kept in his mouth, and so avoided anything that might aggravate his sore throat. Chapter 116. The Constellation Society sent their thanks to John as well. Cedric came over, worried but respectful. "John, thank you. You saved the whole school. I hope this helps." He left a bottle of swelling potion on the table and excused himself. Percy approached afterward, all formality and concern. John waved him off. He was fine. Neville came next, insisting John go to the hospital. "No need," John replied, accepting Neville's worry but refusing the trip. Going to the hospital was out of the question. Neville, relieved but anxious, doubled his training. By his side were Malfoy and Heinrich, the latter serving as his tough instructor. Time passed. John kept silent, waiting for the next full moon. He'd noticed Lupin might be suspecting something about him, so he kept to himself. Lupin had better instincts than John expected, and John preferred to stay hidden. Snape, for once, didn't try to corner him as a werewolf. John slipped away to the Chamber of Secrets and stayed there most of the time, only emerging occasionally to check the weather. Everyone assumed he had gone home. In fact, he remained at Hogwarts in a different routine. Sometimes, people thought they'd seen him and did a double take. John waited for the second full moon. Luck held. The sky was clear. If it had been cloudy, he would have had to find another leaf and start over. He took out the saliva-soaked leaf, placed it in a clear glass vial, and exposed it to the unfiltered moonlight. He plucked a strand of his hair, added dew and the pupa of a death's head hawk moth. After mixing the ingredients, he hid the vial in the forbidden forest where the spider nest had once been, now empty after Fiendfire had burned it away. He had followed the steps exactly. Now he only had to wait for the storm and cast a self-protection charm at each sunrise and sunset. At sunrise the next morning, John pointed his wand at his heart and quietly recited, "Amato animo, animato animagus." When he could speak again, John returned to classes. Slytherin erupted in cheers at his comeback, and to everyone's surprise, Slytherin was still in the lead. Daphne, Malfoy, and Heinrich had hauled in points like mad in John's absence, and the rest of the house had not slacked off. They continued to press Ravenclaw and stayed firmly on top. December arrived and Christmas neared. John had to remain at school while he waited for the storm. He wondered idly whether Mrs. Wick would come to visit. The 3 younger students congratulated him on his recovery. Ron's smile, though, looked forced. John didn't know that Ron had secretly hoped John's absence would let Gryffindor overtake Slytherin. With John back, that hope faded, and Ron's smile grew awkward. One afternoon in class, a long-eared black owl flapped in. Basil, the snowy owl, hopped over and rubbed his head against the newcomer before John took the letter the owl carried. Riddle had brought the bird. The message was from Tang Mi. John read quickly. His face hardened. Tang Mi reported that Cornelius Fudge, under mounting pressure, had begun to shape public opinion. He wanted an enemy to rally support, and there was no target more convenient than Johnny Silverhand, the new power of Nocturne Alley. The Daily Prophet had already pivoted, painting Nocturne Alley as autocratic and turning Johnny Silverhand from benefactor to dictator. Every bloody incident, true or not, that could be linked to Nocturne Alley was being blamed on Johnny. Tang Mi asked whether they should impose a silver hand sanction on Fudge. John snorted. "Sanction?" he muttered. If he was going to hit Fudge, he didn't want to be subtle. "You call him a dictator? Fine. Let him see how a dictator behaves." He opened his silver hand contact book and began to write. Letters to provocateurs, promises of profit to the right people, covert power transactions, hints of armed coercion. He arranged everything to look like a series of provocations and provocateurs, all funneling pressure toward the ministry. The goal was simple: make the ministry's incompetence and selfishness impossible to ignore. "Sometimes brutal methods are unavoidable," he said to no one as he rubbed the gem on his ring. A dangerous aura seemed to stir around him, a predatory eagerness. Within 3 days, tensions erupted inside the Ministry of Magic. Chapter 134: Accountability and Resignation. Cornelius Fudge found himself at wit's end. Not only were ordinary witches and wizards furious, but members of the Sacred 28 had appeared in force. Lucius Malfoy arrived with that practiced air of cool contempt, part mockery, part cold calculation, part indifference. His platinum hair was immaculate, and his cane tapped the polished stone once, twice, thump, thump, a sound that drew every eye in the noisy ministry hall. Lucius was no longer merely an observer. He had returned as a Hogwarts governor and now claimed the title of curator of the Dark Arts Museum. Fudge's smile twitched thinly. "Lucius, what are you doing here?" he demanded. "Minister Fudge," Lucius replied with a tilt of his head, "I am here on behalf of the Hogwarts Board of Governors." He swept through the crowd and took a seat, calm and composed. What had been intended as a press conference for Fudge to deflect blame suddenly felt like sitting on a bed of nails. Rita Skeeter, the Daily Prophet's star reporter, was in the press gallery. Fudge and his aides had planned to use her to steer the narrative toward Nocturne Alley and Johnny Silverhand. If the story was sensational enough, they hoped the Dementors' incursion at Hogwarts would be forgotten in the uproar. Fudge shot a hard look at Lucius. When this settled, he planned to settle scores with the former Death Eater. But more people kept arriving. Fudge's expression darkened as other influential figures took their places. Darman Alex Bilby, Damo Alex, sat with a cold stare. He'd been active in applying pressure before, most recently over the Hagrid affair. Camera flashes popped as Gilderoy Lockhart swept in, wearing a turquoise robe, smiling like he always did. Lockhart, once a wizard celebrity and a Merlin Medal recipient, was also a member of the Anti-Dark Arts League, an influential faction mostly made up of prominent purebloods and ministry officials. Fudge had long used Lockhart's fame to shore up support, though privately he knew Lockhart was a fraud, an inconvenient truth Fudge kept in reserve. Fudge's aides had signaled Lockhart. Lockhart nodded, obligingly present. At last, with the room full of important faces, Fudge straightened his robes and climbed the podium. He glanced at Rita, who bent to take notes. "Ahem," he began, forcing a practiced smile. "Thank you to all my colleagues in the wizarding world for—" Lucius raised a hand lazily and cut him off, voice dripping sarcasm. "Minister Fudge, perhaps you should get to the point." A ripple of suppressed laughter moved through the crowd. Fudge's cheeks flushed. He swallowed and, with no better option, signaled Rita to begin the questioning. She stood, pen poised. To Fudge's shock, Rita's first questions were not the planted sensational ones about Nocturne Alley. They were sharp, pointed, and deadly to his cause. "Minister Fudge," she asked, "what is your view on the Dementors entering Hogwarts as part of their duties? Does this not amount to dereliction of duty by the Ministry?" she pressed on. "Sirius Black's threat still looms over the wizarding world. Do you accept responsibility for this failure? I understand that 10 pureblood families have submitted formal protests to you. What do you say to them?" Rufus Scrimger of the Auror Office suggested using Aurors to control Dementors. Did you refuse that advice for reasons of personal pride or political convenience? Each question was a blade. Fudge's face reddened. He panted, stunned. He hadn't expected the Daily Prophet to turn on him. What was happening? He tried to regain composure, but the damage was done. Lucius rose then, cool and composed. "On behalf of the Hogwarts Board of Governors," he announced, "I demand accountability for the Ministry's dereliction of duty." The reporters leaned forward, hungry. Damo Alex's cane fell heavily. His voice was flat and cutting. The potion masters expressed doubt as to whether Cornelius Fudge is fit to continue leading the Ministry. "We need a wise leader, not an ineffectual clown." Words did the killing. The room closed in on Fudge, and the pressure only tightened. Chapter 117. The Potion Master Alliance, as Damo Alex had put it, was an organization made up of the greatest names in potions. It numbered no more than 10, but every member was an immensely influential master of the craft. The moment those heavy hitters emerged, Gilderoy Lockhart stopped burying his head in his usual theatrics. With his long-practiced, most charming smile firmly in place, he rose and declaimed, "I too question Cornelius Fudge's competence. If I'd been in charge, Dementors would never have breached the school." Fudge's face, already flushed, went redder. How dare this fraud join the chorus? Pointing at Lockhart, he barked, "You charlatan! Everything about you is a lie!" Enraged, he shouted to the Aurors at his side, "Seize him! Send him to Azkaban!" The Aurors, Fudge's loyal contingent, moved at once. Red beams of stunning charms flew toward Lockhart. Fudge wore a smug expression, already picturing the scandal that would sweep Lockhart's reputation away and mask his own failures. "Protego!" Lockhart called dramatically, and a shield charm flared up around him, deflecting the bar. He drew his wand with a confident smile. "It seems you intend to attack a recipient of the Order of Merlin, 3rd class, and an honorary member of the Anti-Dark Arts League." Fudge frowned. The Lockhart he knew shouldn't have been able to throw up such a powerful shield. Magic flowed from a ring into Lockhart's wand. Lockhart smiled and struck. An Expelliarmus sent one Auror skidding back. The shield blocked several red bolts as if it had eyes in the back of its head. With each deft movement, Lockhart sent another Auror flying. 3 of the Aurors had attacked him together, but Lockhart moved with exaggerated nonchalance, one hand behind his back, the other flashing his wand, parrying spells and replying in kind. He turned aside curses without so much as a spoken incantation. His silent magic had the assembled onlookers opening their mouths in disbelief. Reducto! A powerful white blast coalesced and struck all 3 attackers, sending them careering across the floor. Lockhart lowered his wand and, almost theatrically melancholic, said, "Why, oh why, did you make me do this?" Fudge, who had hoped to use Lockhart's disgrace to turn the tide, slumped. Anyone could see Lockhart's capability now. There was no point in keeping up the charade. No one, however, noticed Lockhart's sweating palms. Of the rings that had covered his 10 fingers, only one remained. The drama finished playing out. The next day's Daily Prophet told the rest. Under mounting scandals and accusations, Cornelius Fudge was forced to step down early. Rufus Scrimgeour, head of the Auror office, took over temporarily as Minister of Magic and vowed to make Hogwarts safe. "We will capture Sirius Black at all costs," he promised. "If we find him in a toilet, we'll drown him in the toilet bowl." The new minister's iron-fisted rhetoric was a sharp contrast to Fudge's indecisiveness. Aurors were dispatched to Hogwarts to oversee security and Dementor management. "So cool," Ron said, face aglow. He mimicked Scrimgeour's grim promise. "If we find him in a toilet, we'll drown him in the toilet bowl. Now that's an Auror." Harry jabbed his fork into a potato with equal enthusiasm. They agreed this was the sort of firmness a proper Auror should show. Harry felt a pang of pity for Fudge. He had been kind at the start of the year, but he was pleased overall. At the Slytherin table, Draco preened. "That's your father," someone murmured, and the Slytherins shot envious looks at him. Lucius Malfoy's smiling face was splashed across the Daily Prophet. The Malfoys had clawed their way back to prominence. John turned the paper over and watched the Gryffindor table. Fudge had resigned. Scrimgeour was only temporary, but if Sirius Black were caught, temporary might become permanent. Ron and Hermione were bickering again, something John watched with mild amusement. Their fights always seemed endless, yet didn't stop them from being close. Today's argument was over their pets. Crookshanks kept trying to catch Scabbers. Ron had hated that miserable cat for ages. To him, it was loyalty versus irritation, 12 years with his own pet on one side and a new, ugly cat on the other. John also wondered why Crookshanks was so fixated on Scabbers. Crookshanks was clever. He wouldn't miss what everyone else would. The Marauders map showed the rat next to Ron wasn't labeled Scabbers. John had suspected something, Peter Pettigrew perhaps, but he couldn't exactly march up to Ron and say, "Your rat isn't who you think he is." "That rat's been hiding a lot lately. He barely leaves the dorm," John muttered to himself, intending to investigate. He was about to ask whether the animal was an animagus when someone stood behind him. He turned and found Professor Snape approaching with deliberately measured steps. "Professor," John said. Snape paused, as if he'd been waiting for that very call, then slowly turned. A faint anticipation flickered across his face. John wiped his mouth and offered a single phrase. "I know," Snape said cryptically. A rare, thin smile appeared on Snape's face when John spoke the next word. "Full moon," John said. Snape's reply was cool but approving. "Mr. Wick, you are a clever man." John heard the compliment and returned a tight smile. The two moved off, each into their own business. Daphne watched them with bewilderment. Heinrich took a cautious sip of juice. Garlic essence, he thought, and then drifted toward the Gryffindor table. The Weasley twins, their prank thwarted, skittered away. Harry was buoyant. Professor Lupin had agreed to teach him the Patronus charm. After Christmas, the taunts from Malfoy and his cronies would be easier to bear. Of course, Draco arrived on cue. The Slytherin and Gryffindor tables were separated by Hufflepuff, but Malfoy made a point of parading past Harry's side. The Dementors are coming. He feigned panic and set Pansy and the others giggling. Harry's face soured. Ron and Hermione, fresh from their argument, fell instantly into protective mode. "Shut up, Malfoy," Ron snapped and stood. Malfoy met him without flinching. "Weasley, be grateful this is in the Great Hall," he hissed low enough for only Ron to hear. "If you dare, duel me." Ron's expression tightened. He'd fought Malfoy before and knew the boy had gotten stronger. This could go badly. Thanks to Percy's connections with the Constellation Society, Malfoy had learned to bite his tongue about class. Still, he couldn't resist a dig. "I'll duel you, Malfoy," Ron said, and Harry moved forward in his friend's defense. "Enough, Malfoy. Do you want detention?" Hermione interposed, preventing a scene. She stared at Malfoy without yielding. Points would be lost for hexing, and Gryffindor was already trailing Ravenclaw. Malfoy shrugged and taunted Harry with a mocking baby face. "Oh, baby Potter, always hiding behind his friends." Then he turned and left with his group. Ron slammed his fist on the table in frustration. Hermione soothed Harry, and the three of them were quickly reconciled. Time passed. John threw himself into practice, casting every spell he could from dawn until dusk. The storm he'd hoped for never came, which was a source of mild annoyance. He liked the way Dementors tested him. Previously, he could trick a Dementor into coming after him with a disillusionment charm, lure it, and practice. Now, Aurors had corralled the Dementors into one area. They still slipped free sometimes, and when a few vanished in a search, the Aurors would assume they'd fled. They didn't suspect the truth. Dementors sometimes simply disappeared into thin air. They wanted to run from whatever prey or predator haunted them, and yet were pulled back, miserable and lost. John didn't pity them. His soul surgery techniques improved. He was getting better at extracting and preserving broken soul fragments in bottles. A shelf now stood full of vials, white light trapped inside, over a dozen Dementors decomposed and contained. The ring he wore had grown darker with every extraction. He'd stopped needing to lure Dementors. He could now pull them in directly with the soul-eating curse. "That's enough," he told himself, surveying the lined bottles. The shelf's glow was enough for the next stage, surgery on Nagini. John reached for an unused box with his left hand and murmured, "Crush." The box collapsed as if a giant hand had squeezed it. An unusual force surged and pulverized it from all sides. Chapter 118. Unlike the shattering spell, this was ancient magic, a variant of telekinesis. It sounded like the levitation charm, but it was different in essence. The levitation charm lifts an object so it can cause damage by falling weight. This telekinetic variant grasped and accelerated an object as if thrown by a hand. John had found it in a book on forbidden magic. He snapped his fingers. The shattered box burst into flames and burned to ash. "That leaves no evidence," he murmured. John chuckled. With the right materials, there was no need to hurt the Dementor. After tidying the soul fragments, he looked at the boggart, which had lain still for some time, and decided to let it go. December 18th. Students gathered at the castle gates for Hogsmeade, and John spotted Harry standing alone at the entrance, looking miserable. With a soft sigh, Harry turned to leave. Poor thing, John thought. Since he had 2 Marauders maps anyway, John decided to give one to Harry. The map had originally been Harry's, after all. He called out, and Harry turned, puzzled at John's approach. John produced a piece of parchment. Harry frowned, half expecting homework. John smiled, a hint of mischief on his face. There's more than one way to leave Hogwarts. He tapped the blank parchment with his wand. I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. Ink trails spread across the paper. Harry's eyes widened. The Marauder's map, John said with a chuckle. You know what it's for. Harry stared, stunned. This, for me? Of course, John nodded. It was always yours. Harry beamed. He studied the rotes the map revealed and thanked John sincerely. Thank you, John. John waved and left the castle. Shortly after, Harry prepared to use a secret passage, only to be intercepted by the Weasley twins. They spirited him off to a classroom on the fourth floor, grinning. "Before we go, let's get you into the holiday spirit," they teased, shoving him inside. They showed him a secret passage that led out of Hogwarts. Harry fumbled with the Marauder's map. Fred's sharp eyes soon caught sight of it. "So it was you all along," Fred said. "We thought we lost it." The twins took the map from him and handled it as though it were theirs. Harry didn't mind much. At last he could go to Hogsmeade. He used the humpbacked, one-eyed witch statue's passage, walked the tunnel, and emerged at Honeyduke's. Chapter 136, Leaving School and Soul Surgery. While his classmates enjoyed Hogsmeade, John did not. He apparated from the village to Belby Manor. With a sharp crack, he materialized outside. Inside, Damo Alex was casually stirring a potion. He looked up and smiled when John entered. "You're finally here. That big snake is about to wake," he said. Fresh from the ministry, proud from having toppled a minister of magic, Damo Alex was in good spirits. Under John's guidance, he had been refining the blood magic potion. They had added mandrake leaves. The scarlet brew shifted to green. Then John produced a small bottle. At first, Damo Alex regarded it with indifference, but when he saw its contents, he grabbed John's hand in alarm. "What have you done?" he demanded, voice trembling with accusation and fear. The bottle held souls, pale, broken, and lacking any spark of consciousness. Even in their inert state, they filled Damo Alex with dread. "Souls are taboo," he whispered. "You violated that." John smiled faintly. "Don't worry, I haven't killed anyone." Damo Alex didn't believe him at first, but John's calm face eased him. "I'll explain later," John added. "I wouldn't do that." After a moment, Damo Alex nodded. "All right." When the bottle's contents were poured in, the green potion turned black and then shifted to a luminous white. John knew with certainty that the blood magic potion had finally succeeded. The white glow filled the dim dungeon. Now only the surgery remained. John opened the snake's cell and stepped inside. Using water magic, he formed the potion into a sphere and fed it into the snake's mouth. Silver threads began to drift out. Soon the entire creature exuded silvery filaments. "It worked," John breathed. Under his enhanced insight, he watched the snake change. Damo Alex scribbled feverishly, not wanting to miss any detail. As more silvery threads emerged, Nagini's voice echoed faintly in John's head. "John?" "It's me," he answered, and the simple reply carried a strange comfort. John reached out and took one of the threads. Instantly, his consciousness tunneled through endless corridors and landed in a blank, misty space, a liminal place between life and death. The place he found himself in was all white, an endless expanse. A figure sat curled in a corner, a woman in a blue dress, her features East Asian, long black hair, autumn-clear eyes. Nagini, though not as he had seen her in the physical world. An ominous blood-green aura clung to her. "Nagini?" John called softly. She trembled and looked up, staring at him in disbelief. "John?" Her features were still beautiful, but the blood curse had ravaged her. Cracks like spiderwebs ran across her, as if she were a shattered porcelain doll. Large chunks of her form were missing, blood-green corruption seeping out. In her palm, she cradled a tiny, silvery figure, the soul contained in the blood magic potion, working desperately to glue her fragments back together. Nagini looked on the verge of breaking. John stepped closer. The blood-green aura merged with her, woven into her very being. This was worse than a dementor. He squared his shoulders. "Nagini, I'm going to treat you now," he said, his voice steady. He raised his hand. In the waking world, his hand moved in perfect synchronicity with the one in the mist. "If you can't bear it, tell me," he added. Hope flared in Nagini's eyes, and she nodded. John opened all the small soul vials he carried. Sacred white orbs orbited him in the mist. He pierced one with his wand and spoke a simple command. "Return, soul." The orb unfurled into 100 razor-sharp soul scalpels that dove into Nagini. She felt each incision as a skin-deep agony, her delicate face twisted with pain. John guided the scalpels to pull the blood curse out bit by bit. The curse resisted, coalescing into a python-like writhing mass that lunged at the soul tools. John's expression hardened, his hands steady. He kept working until one mass was exhausted, then turned another orb into scalpels and continued. Minutes stretched as he pulled out the corruption, even from hair-thin crevices. Nagini's soul was tattered and leaking, The scalpels probed and peeled the curse free. John sweated, utterly focused, his studious mode engaged, meticulous as he extracted the tiniest remnants of the blood curse. Chapter 119, The Illusory Realm and the Hidden Soul Outside. Damo Alex's eyes were fixed on the direction of the great snake, which was bathed in a silvery white light as its body slowly shifted. He forced himself to stay silent. His excitement was almost unbearable. This was a miracle, something no one, not even Merlin, could claim to have achieved. John moved like an orchestra conductor. Each wave of his wand stripped away another layer of the blood curse. Under Damo Alex's tense stare, the snake's flesh began to change. Parts of it became human, hands, feet, half man, half snake, grotesque and uncanny. John never faltered. He kept his focus, his eyes reflecting what unfolded inside the illusory realm. The blood curse, largely expelled but unwilling to die, condensed into a giant python shrouded in a blood-green aura. The python opened its maw and lunged to swallow John whole. John's brow twitched. He thrust his wand into a mass of gathered soul and flung it out. The moment the soul left his hand, it became a blinding white light and struck the blood curse, a soul-shattering spell. The giant python staggered. The soul mass in John's hand took shape as a great sword, and he brought it down on the python's head. The blood curse screamed, its bulk tearing back toward Nagini in desperate retreat. John would not let it succeed. The soul figure swelled like a balloon and engulfed Nagini. The retreating curse crashed into it, rattling the construct. John seized the moment and struck at the base of the python. White light erupted from its body. It writhed and could not flee. Trying to run? John sneered, grabbing another mass of soul. It burst into white flames that coalesced into a spectral dragon, which bit and tore at the giant python. The blood curse could not escape. Amid unending wails, it was consumed by soul fire. John watched until the last remnant of the curse dissolved, then allowed himself a breath of relief. The soul figure around Nagini could not hold any longer either. It shrank rapidly, like something deflating. Nagini's fragmented soul stared at John blankly. She had not expected the blood curse to dissipate so completely. "All right, it's over," John said softly. Though weakened and bloodied, his smile was genuine. He came to Nagini's side and used the last mass of soul to mend her. These souls had been refined by Dementors over centuries of devouring, and as they touched Nagini, they began to merge into her. "Welcome back, Nagini," John said, offering his hand in a gentlemanly gesture. Nagini looked at the boy and slowly reached for him. Then, suddenly, everything changed. Just before their hands met, John's heart skipped. A force struck him and sent him flying. He rolled and righted himself, looking up to see a figure in the illusory realm. The sight made John's pupils contract. The face was familiar, paler, older, cruelly handsome, occasionally flashing red around the eyes. He wore a simple suit and a cold, mocking smile. John ground his teeth and spoke the name through clenched lips. Lord Voldemort. Voldemort looked older than John remembered from his student days, deadlier and more refined. He held no wand. He merely regarded John with cool dismissal. "So it was you who trespassed into my world," he said, with a faint note of contempt. John laughed bitterly. "Yours? You turned Nagini into a Horcrux, didn't you?" he accused. Of course, Nagini had not only been entangled with the blood curse, she housed a fragment of Voldemort's soul. John should have seen it coming. To split off part of his soul and lodge it in another being, Voldemort had been merciless to everyone and even to himself. Blood stained John's lip. His body was hurt. If the soul suffered, the body followed. Nagini tried to help, but Voldemort reached out with an invisible hand and seized her, lifting her by the throat. "Nagini, you are mine," he declared, possessive and absolute. "Joan," Nagini croaked, barely audible. John acted without hesitation. The instant he raised his hand, Voldemort was forced back, and the invisible grip disappeared. Nagini collapsed to the ground. John said coldly, "You're not the only one who knows these charms." Voldemort hovered, surprised, then floated down with a dangerous smile. His eyes burned with bloodlust. "A weak soul dares to meddle in the illusory realm," he said. John glanced at his left hand. The silvery glow had faded from his fingers. His stomach sank. Using those charms here consumed his own soul. He whispered, "Of course, to cut soul, you must use soul." He was trapped. Without greater magical support, he had no way to defeat Voldemort here. If he retreated, Nagini would be finished. He could not leave her, so he fought. John unleashed his power. The empty, illusory realm erupted in flame. His rate of soul loss accelerated. A spark flared in his right hand and swelled into a massive fireball. Voldemort's face darkened. He had not expected John to master ancient magics. John then conjured a water serpent. Where his fire met the water, a thick, concealing mist frothed up across the realm. He blew, and the mist drifted to swallow Voldemort's figure. Born of colliding souls, the fog obscured vision and scent. John slipped into it. Passing his left hand over his right, John formed a dagger out of condensed soul. The price was brutal. His right hand went almost transparent, ethereal, as if already gone. He smiled without warmth. Magic? Don't forget, I'm a level 7 short weapon master. In the mist, John became an omnipresent night demon. Voldemort, shrouded in the fog, seemed untroubled. An oppressive aura rolled off him. A green light, cold and venomous, sliced through the mist toward where John had been standing. Voldemort struck in confident ignorance, but within a heartbeat his expression tightened as if something squeezed his heart. He spun, and in that instant 7 blood holes bloomed across his back. John had struck like a ghost. Crucio, Voldemort hissed. A bolt of red lightning leapt at John. He grunted as the bolt scorched the dagger in his hand, punching a ragged hole through it. He hurled the wounded dagger and used a summoning charm to pull it back like a missile. The blade flashed and struck a defensive shield Voldemort raised. It shattered into a spray of iridescent bubbles. Voldemort faltered, just for a beat. John lunged. His eyes narrowed into slits. In a furious, brutal motion, he tore his left hand away and reshaped it into a shimmering silver sword. He bellowed in dragon tongue, "I am a dragon." Flames clung to the blade as he screamed and thrust. The sword drove into Voldemort's body. Fire cascaded outward in a roaring tide. For the first time, Voldemort's composure cracked. He clutched the blade with an enraged, frantic hand, his eyes spitting hatred. "You cannot escape now, Avada," he snarled. But Voldemort was never one to die quietly. As he lashed out, a streak of emerald light shot toward John's face. John had miscalculated. He had thought one decisive blow would end the fight, but he had underestimated his opponent. Just as the green bolt was about to strike, a frail figure lunged between them. Nagini, now in a liminal, nearly human form, threw herself into the path of the curse. The green light skimmed John's cheek as it passed, then slammed into her. Voldemort seized her by the neck and flung her aside like a rag doll. "Avada Kedavra!" he roared, pouring all his killing intent into the spell. The green bolt rocketed toward Nagini. She closed her eyes and accepted it, a resigned, almost peaceful expression passing over her features. For her, saving John had been enough. Time seemed to pause. The green light slowed until it seemed to hang in the air. Nagini's resolve and Lord Voldemort's malice were both starkly clear. John released his grip on the sword, and with trembling calm, reached out toward Nagini. His lips moved once. "Return, soul." The light filled the chamber. Nagini's eyes opened to a dim dungeon. She blinked, confused. Before her stood 2 figures, a bald old man with a slack-jawed, motionless face, and the other, John. John's eyes were shut. His skin had gone pale, the color draining into gray, as if life itself were slipping away. Nagini felt her chest tighten. She tried to move to him, but passed straight through his body. Her own soul, silver white and translucent, looked back to where her human form now lay, quiet, restored to its original shape. Panic that she had never known before surged through her like a child's terror. Somewhere in her mind, another presence tugged, one she had not managed to grasp. Damo Alex finally came to his senses. He staggered to his feet and looked between them in a daze. "Did it work?" he asked hoarsely. Ignoring his own exhilaration, he sprinted to John's side. John's face had gone ashen. The young man had apparently used a ghostly spell to pull Nagini's soul free, and the strain had taken him. "Where's John? What happened?" Damo Alex's voice broke into a roar. Without waiting, he fumbled for a potion and forced John's mouth open, tipping the liquid down his throat. For a moment, nothing changed. Then the world shifted into an ethereal place. Voldemort's expression froze as Nagini's essence vanished. He looked bewildered. Then John, pale and thread-like in that plane, managed a small, defiant smile. "You don't understand these things, do you?" John said softly, and Voldemort's face contorted with fury. Voldemort lashed out. The The blow struck John's fragile form, and it flickered like a candle flame. The Dark Lord coalesced into black smoke, appeared directly in front of him, and seized him by the throat. The silver sword at John's chest cracked under the pressure. John's eyes dimmed. Yet even as death crept in, a slight smile lingered on his lips. "Want to know?" he whispered. "Then go ask." He looked past Voldemort. The Dark Lord hesitated and turned. That single moment, Voldemort's attention elsewhere, was all John needed. He had only just learned it, and he had never cast it before. Wandless, desperate, concentrated into one impossible act, Avada Kedavra. A green jet of light struck Voldemort full in the face. Cracks spidered across his once handsome visage. He screamed like a thing bereft of control, clutching at his face, and yet the curse took hold. Under the scream, under the tearing of flesh and bone, Lord Voldemort's Horcrux fragment began to die. His body split apart inch by inch, a green light leaking from within as the piece of him unraveled and crumbled. John sank to the plane's ground and looked toward the place Voldemort had been looking. He hadn't lied. Somewhere beyond, a figure in a black cloak watched in silence. John's soul felt colder, thinning, as if at the edge of dissipating entirely. "Can you let me die knowing what I did?" he asked the cloaked figure, spreading his hands. The figure said nothing aloud, but John felt a smile, small and amused, behind the hood. "Interesting," the presence intoned. "You are the most interesting person I have met." The black-cloaked presence drew nearer, radiating a stillness that squeezed the air. The voice finally named itself. "You call me Death," it said. Death's voice carried a familiarity, as if telling a story one had heard before. In that hollowed, intense space, the figure recited a tale, old and quiet, the tale of the three brothers. Once, it said, 3 brothers traveled at dawn along a winding, lonely road and reached a river so deep and swift no one could cross it. They were clever and knew magic, so they conjured a bridge. Midway across, a hooded figure blocked their path. It was Death. Angered at being cheated of his usual claim, Death feigned admiration and offered each brother a reward. The eldest asked for a wand more powerful than any other, the Elder Wand, and Death fashioned one from a branch of Elder. The second wanted the power to call back the dead. Death gave him a stone from the riverbank, a resurrection stone. The youngest, cautious and wise, asked for something to hide him from Death's sight. Death, reluctant, gave his own invisibility cloak. The 3 objects were the Deathly Hallows. Pride destroyed the eldest. Grief drove the second to despair. Only the third used the cloak well, lived to a ripe old age, and greeted Death as an equal when his time came. As the tale ended, John stared into the hood. He had expected accusation, finality. Instead, Death seemed almost amused. "So I die?" John asked, more to himself than to the hooded shape. "Indeed," Death replied. John allowed a wry, tired laugh. "Risked my life to save someone, and this is how it ends. Feels foolish." He showed no hysteria. He did not bargain. He had only so recently taken up a new path, white magic, and had not wanted it to end like this. Death studied him for a long moment, intrigued by his composure, then made a gesture with that unseen hand. The cold pull John had felt relaxed. To his astonishment, his thread of being grew firmer again. "There was once someone like you," Death said, "someone who accepted what came without vain cries. It is not your time. If you had not interfered, you would not be here. The ethereal place is for those who drift and defy. You helped me settle one who toyed with life and death. Consider this repayment." Light blurred the edges of everything. John felt himself being tugged away from the scene. The white light stung his eyes until he had to squeeze them closed. When he opened them again, reality rushed back in like a painful gasp. Damo Alex's face, wet with tears and snot, nearly collided with his. "Oh my." John shoved him away, then quickly checked himself in disgust, as if the sight of the tears was an untidiness. He slapped his own cheek to prove he was there. The smack echoed, and his skin stung. "It's real," he breathed. Damo Alex, stunned and ecstatic in turn, fumbled. He had seen John stop breathing. He had poured potions down John's throat, and now, with trembling hands, he backed away from him like a man who still feared losing what he'd been given. Don't move too fast," he warned, half laughing, half sobbing. John felt every ache and the bad taste of whatever potion had been forced on him. He looked up at Nagini. The woman who had been and the snake that had been merged into one, her human form lay on the floor, blinking open tears. She smiled through them as she sat up, fragile and amazed. "I'm back," John said simply. Nagini's eyes shone. As her soul had been returned, she gave a small, shuddering laugh, and then, with those tears still on her face, whispered, "Thank you, John."